The boys were in a tent. Kirani noted that he is glad to meet you. Sai tilted his head down. The main character introduced himself. In front of him were Yasuda Yaki, master of the Long-Range Attacker Guild Dalnik, and Yamagawa Nami, master of the Buffers Guild Yamabiko. Kirani got up from his chair. Sai thought that they would pretend that he wasn't there. There was a weapon at the entrance of the tent. The armored man put the axe on his shoulder. He asked who would be in the third group. The plot was presented to us by Arakawa Jin, who is the master of tanks of the Titan Guild. Kirani turned his head in his direction. The main character stated that he is the master of the guild Reboot Kirani C. A smirk appeared on Arakawa's face. He didn't know which guild he was talking about. Jin noticed that there were only 2 people in it. Arakawa set down his weapon. Jin reported that he had heard of Kirani before. He told him about the rumor that Sho had killed Hijikata. The main character noted that he was only lucky. Arakawa agreed with him. A memory of Hijikata popped up in his mind. Jin said that he had seen him in middle school before. Arakawa believed that he couldn't defeat Hijikata even in the past. Jin didn't understand how an inexperienced hunter like Kirani could defeat him with his abilities. A look of displeasure appeared on Zai's face. He understood what was going on. Jin folded his hands. The main character stated that if Arakawa doesn't believe him, he can check it out personally. Zai's body was covered in mana. Kirani thought that Jin didn't believe in his abilities. If you can't, then others can't, Kirani added. The main character considered Jin stupid. Arakawa jumped up from his chair. He was furious at Kirani's words. Yasuda's gaze was fixed on Arakawa. He asked me to stop them. Yaki said it was time to move out for a sweep. Jin picked up his weapon. He put a hand on Kirani's shoulder. Arakawa wanted to test how long Sho would last. The main character brushed his hand off his shoulder. The hunters were standing in front of the portal entrance. The man reported that all the monsters in Magnus' Cradle were identified as guards. He noted that the real reason for this is unknown, but it is not difficult to guess that it is the core inside the dungeon. The man said that the hunters had set up a camp outside the dungeon in case something went wrong. He added that no one knows if the fault will break out. The man was standing behind a wooden counter. He noted that this dungeon was completely different from the others. The plot introduces us to Uhara Jinisuke, who is the master of the Poison Guild and the commander of Conquest. Aoki was standing in the line of hunters. Uhara reported that this time, the subjugation team was assembled to prevent danger in advance. The hunters set off. Jinisuke stated that he wanted everyone to keep an eye on the zone they had chosen. Uhara wished them luck. Shin looked up. He was glad that he would finally enter an S-rank dungeon. The main character was heading towards the portal. A battle was taking place in the dungeon. Jin reported that the monsters were coming. Arakawa killed the monster that attacked him. Arrows that were loaded with mana were flying at the monsters. Jin ordered that the big monsters be left to the tanks and the smaller ones to be taken care of. He noted that they should aim for the legs. One of the monsters was defeated. Yasuda and the other healers were helping them. Arakawa asked them to use their abilities when the front and back rows were switched. The defeated monsters scattered in different directions. The hunter was searching the monster's body. Jin told him to get up if he had already packed his things. The hunter accepted his order. Arakawa watched Kirani standing off to the side. Sai believed that there was no place for him to join the battle. Kirani assumed that Jin had decided not to leave him a job. A smirk appeared on Arakawa's face. Sai turned his head in his direction. The main character thought it was wrong for Jin to incite him in a place where their lives were in danger. Kishida was standing beside her, looking dumbfounded. He asked Kirani if he was going to be okay. Sai asked him not to worry. The main character noted that this level is perfect for him. In front of them was the dungeon boss. Kirani's face was in shadow. Sai became alert. Kirani assumed they weren't even going to hide it anymore. Arakawa squatted down. Jin taunted the Zai Guild and talked about how it was time for a reset. Arakawa noted that they have only 2 people in the team. He didn't know what to do. Kirani drew his sword. Zai reported that they were done with the preparations, and he asked Jin to close his mouth and just watch. Kirani was wearing a bracelet. Zai believed that there was no need to use the infernal ash sword. Kishida charged into the battle. Kirani ordered him to attack the dungeon monster. Rocks flew in all directions. Shin faced the monster in battle. Kishida activated a rank of defensive stance. Kishida continued to attack. Zai asked him not to stop. He added that Shin should send out a wave. Kishida could barely stand on his feet. Yamagawa held a weapon in her hands. She was startled to see a rank C hunter standing in front of her. Kirani attacked the monster. Zai wounded him. The monster decided to retreat. A smile appeared on Kishida's face. He told the monster that his opponent was him. Shin attacked him. The monster fell to the ground. Zai caught the arrow. Kirani was taken aback. He didn't know what it was. A grin appeared on the young man's face. Yasuda said that they felt that it was too hard for them, so they decided to help. He asked if they had any questions. Kiritani broke the arrow. Sai informed them that they didn't need any help with such an easy opponent. Kiritani asked if they had ever heard of manners. The Uki raised his hand. The young man was furious. A smirk appeared on Kiritani's face. He told them to take care of themselves because they know better than others how to do it. A huge monster appeared from behind Kiritani and let out a roar. Sai rushed into battle. There were blood splatters everywhere. Kiritani hacked it into pieces. He couldn't believe it. Sai turned to look at them. The main character noted, "What is much more important is quality, not quantity." Kiritani believed that people with thousands of members in their guilds would never understand this. Arakawa was shocked by this. Yasuda pointed at Kiritani. Yuki noted that this guy is a very famous hunter, so at least he should have confidence in himself. Yasuda ordered them to be dealt with quickly so that they could move on. The main character was wary. He thought that he felt a strange premonition. Sai assumed it was from behind. A look of excitement crossed his face. Kiritani ordered everyone to lie down. A huge monster was crawling along the stone pipe. His eyes glowed red. Shells started raining down from his body. With these projectiles, he began to attack the hunters. The hunters were confused. Shen was confused. The main character repelled one of the shells. It flew into the ground. A trap was activated on the ground. Zai noted that they had activated it. The Magnus effect. This is a phenomenon that occurs due to the pressure difference resulting from the rotation of an object and its movement on a smooth surface. This Cradle of Magnus dungeon is named after the characteristics of monster attacks. The monster continued to attack the hunters. Kiritani said that if they were careless, they would be smeared. Zai thought about it. He suggested that because of this, the previous research was interrupted. Kiritani blocked the incoming projectiles. Sai concentrated his mana into the sword. The main character believed that the fact that he could defend against attacks of such magnitude without magic powers proved that he was slowly gaining intuition from his past life. Kiritani knew it was too early to celebrate. The monster continued its attacks. Sho asked Kishida to move away from here because it was dangerous here. Shin agreed with him. Kiritani swung his sword. He thought about killing the monster before it did any more damage. Kiritani cut off his head. Shin raised his hands. Arakawa thanked Sho for dealing with the monster. Jin held the weapon to Kishida's throat. Arakawa ordered him not to make any unnecessary movements. The main character was taken aback. He assumed that he was too hasty in dealing with the monster. Around him, the hunters were fighting each other. Sai thought it was a strange idea to do this to the other band members. The guy said that the hunters went crazy. The man told those who were not affected by the poison to put on protective talismans and fight. He was holding a hunter who was under the influence of a guard. The man asked to neutralize all those who are under the influence. Hiller was healing the hunter's wounds. The man noted that all healers should help with wounds. Zai was standing in front of a trap that was emitting poison. He thought they were too caught up in the trajectory of their attacks. Kiritani suggested that it was the additional mind poisoning effect of the projectiles. A look of confusion crossed his face. Zai guessed that he had expected this turn of events from the very beginning. Jin had a smirk on his face. He considered it a coincidence. Arakawa pointed out that he never thought that a Raimire dungeon trick would appear in such a place. Well, it was much easier to do that with you, that's true, Jin continued. Arakawa added that he could just say that he was under the influence of a poison. Jin's face betrayed his joy. What a pity, isn't it? Arakawa asked. Jin claimed that Kiritani had made him look bad, so he would have to deal with the consequences. He ordered Zai to hand over his weapon. There was blood on Kishida's throat. Arakawa said that if Kiritani didn't listen, his only teammate's head would fall to the ground. The hunters continued to fight among themselves. Unexpected psychological attack. A battlefield where enemies cannot be distinguished from allies. The main character was taken aback. Sai guessed that Jin would surely be forgiven. He thought that Arakawa had overlooked something. Kiritani thought that he might use that excuse too. C asked if Jin was sure he could handle him without a weapon. Arakawa had a smirk on his face. He asked if he was right about that. Kiritani's face was full of seriousness. C stated that Jin did everything wrong in the first place. He noted that not only Jin can go off the rails. He ordered Kishida to duck. Shin covered his head with his hands. Arakawa was taken aback. With just one attack, Kiritani took Jin's head off. His head fell to the ground. Shin watched Arakawa's body. The system notified Zai about the level increase, as well as the acquisition of a new ability. Kiritani's sword was covered in mana. The main character noted that he now has 135 mana and a sword with a martial arts bonus that is 4 times stronger than a class item, even if it is just iron. Sho thought about how Arakawa had forgotten to protect himself, even though everything was going against him in the first place. Kishida approached Sho. He asked what they would do. Kiritani started walking towards Jin's body. Sho punched Arakawa's arm. Jin's body was discovered by Yasuda and Yamagawa. Kiritani speculated that Arakawa was hit by a psychic attack after avoiding the core. He pointed out that the animal state of an S-class hunter was simply terrible. Zai asked what they thought it was like. Nami was shocked. The main character was standing in front of them. He waited for their response. Displeasure appeared on their faces. Yamagawa assumed that the monster had taken over Arakawa's mind. Daoki agreed with him. Kiritani was pleased with their response. The tent lights were on. The action takes place in Aoki Sora's private tent. Aoki was sitting at the table, holding a book in her hands. Sora was shocked. Aoki was heading towards Sho. She was surprised by his presence. Kiritani shoved his hands into the pockets of his coat. He assumed that Sora had ratted him out. Aoki said it was true. Sora noted that Sho is the only one who gets on people's nerves in this way. Aoki was excited. She asked what Kiritani wanted. Sora assumed that the other hunter had done something to him. Zai's face was confident. Kiritani said that he had already taken care of this. Zai wondered what they were planning to do next. Aoki put her hand on her hip. Sora noted that Kiritani might have asked about her earlier. Zai asked if one glance wasn't enough. The main character added that one team was only able to return because Aoki was fine. Sora was upset. Aoki noted that the first group was no different from the third. There was a faint glow in the tunnel. Sora stated that she would be on the same team as the top hunters, regardless of the guild. Aoki asked about the number of people who can reach the second stage. Sora guessed that they were even reorganizing the trains. Kiritani put a finger to his chin. He thought about how the top hunters knew each other and knew the abilities of everyone in the team. Zai assumed that the main sweep team had already been formed. Kiritani asked Aoki to recommend him when the formation took place. Zai said that he really wanted to get to the second floor. Sora put her hands down. Aoki said it was very similar. Kiritani thought they were close enough to make such requests. Aoki's face was serious. She asked Zai not to decide out of the blue that they were close. Sora noted that they had met several times, so she didn't think their relationship was that close. Kiritani leaned toward Aoki. He stated that he would teach her the next step of using mana. Zai asked if they would do it. Sora took a step back. Aoki was taken aback by Kiritani's actions. She asked Zai not to expect anything from her. Sora noted that even though she had the right to influence things, it wasn't perfect. Aoki guessed that if it was a request that wasn't worth paying attention to, the guild masters would probably reject it. Kiritani said he didn't care. He noted that it is much more important to him that it will be Aoki's recommendation. Sora blushed. Sora said she didn't want his flattery. Zai took his hand out of his pocket. Kiritani wasn't sure how to use it. He noted that the abilities remained the same. Night fell in the dungeon. In front of us was the entrance to the second floor of the temporary camp. The healer was healing the hunter's wounds. The hunter screamed in pain. The healer reported that there was still some time left. Kishida was standing behind her. Shin assumed that the first group that fought on the second floor was attacked by the same monster. Kishida thought that they had been thinking too long, so the damage spread. Kiritani said that Shin can now get some rest. The plot takes us to a few hours later. Uhara was standing at the entrance of the second floor. He stated that the remaining team would guard the first floor. Genosuke added that the selected elite group will go to the second floor. Kishida put his hand to his face. Shin asked what strings he had pulled. He noted that no matter how tough Kiritani was, he believed that these people would never have taken him into the first squad. Sho's gaze was directed at Aoki. Kiritani said that he just used his pass. Zai was holding a sword in his hands. The main character noted that if something happens to Kishida, he should contact the Poison Guild. Kiritani added that everyone there knows Aoki, so Shin won't be lost. Kishida asked Kiritani to take care of herself. The hunter heard some sounds. The first squad stopped. A shell flew in their direction. Uhara dodged it. This projectile was filled with mana. It flew into the ground. The hunter turned his head towards Genosuke. He said that the force of these shells is many times greater than on the first floor. The hunter asked everyone to be careful. The magic projectiles were directed towards the first squad. The projectiles attacked the hunters from all directions. Kiritani dodged them. The main character thought about it. Sai thought that they were as prepared as if they were waiting for him to arrive. In front of the first squad was a crowd of monsters. The hunter noted that there were a lot more monsters than they expected. The monster let out a roar. Magic projectiles shot out from their bodies. The hunters continued to dodge them. The guy claimed that these monsters were 10 times stronger than the ones on the first floor. The young man deflected the projectile with his sword. He didn't understand what they meant by above S rank. He felt that the association had underestimated the monsters. With his shield, Uhara blocked the monster's attack. Genosuke knew that since there was no turning back, they couldn't even retreat. Uhara put mana into his shield. Genosuke swung it. He thought it was still a little early. Uhara activated the Unwavering Alliance. Genosuke's technique surrounded the first squad. Kiritani's eyes were fixed on the bracelet. Zai clenched his fist. The main character noticed that his stamina and life increased, as well as resistance. Kirani assumed that this was the effect of Guildmaster Ohara's ability. The hunters prepared to attack. They noted Genosuke's strength. The guy said that now they don't care about monster shells. He activated the mana wall. A magic barrier appeared around him. This barrier blocked the monster's projectiles. The guy was glad that it worked. The hunters rushed into battle. The guy notified them that the next spell was 30 seconds away. Members of the first squad stated that they would cover him during the ability rollback. The young man decided to help his wounded allies. He reported that the two men were enraged. The healer declared that he would cure them. Zai thought about it. Kirani was thinking of high-ranked hunters who have excellent communication and teamwork skills. Behind him, the protagonist heard a monster roar. Kirani cut it into 2 pieces. Zai guessed that the monsters had decided to change their strategy since their ranged attacks were stopped. He was thinking that it was his turn to play. Kirani continued to kill monsters. A monster that was letting out a strong roar got in his way. Zai rushed towards him. Kirani stabbed him with his sword. Zai's weapon was shrouded in technology. Kirani used the ability Deadly Poison. The monster's body was covered in toxin. In parallel, Zai was fighting a second monster. Kirani used an ability called Hand of Death on him. The monsters started screaming in pain. The hunters were shocked by this. The guy thought that Sho only got into the squad because of his connections with Aoki. Kirani continued to destroy the monsters. He was surprised that Zai had killed all these monsters on his own. He didn't think it was just a matter of talent. The defeated monster collapsed to the ground. The entire second floor was filled with the remains of monsters. Ohara said that after cleaning up, they would go to the 3rd floor. Aoki was standing behind Kirani, looking happy. Sora felt that Sho had proved the validity of her recommendation. Kirani said it was a pass fee. Aoki was taken aback. Genosuke placed his hands on his hips. Ohara said he expected nothing less from Aoki's recommendation. Sora was confused. Behind them lay the severed heads of monsters. Sora noticed that the 2nd floor looked much longer than the previous one. Genosuke agreed with her. Ohara believed that in a pyramid-shaped dungeon, the lower they descended, the longer the floors would be. Aoki closed her eyes. Sora assumed that they would finish their sortie faster than planned. Ohara told Aoki not to relax. Genosuke reported that the intricate path was fraught with many dangers, just like this floor. The first squad noticed a sound. Ohara was shocked. Kirani became alert. The guy didn't understand what was going on. In the dungeon, the ceiling began to crumble. Genosuke stated that this is the beginning of a rift. He ordered the hunters to drop what they were doing and run to the 3rd floor. The main character was standing in front of the stairs that led to the 3rd floor. Aoki was confused. She didn't understand why Zai wasn't coming with them. Kirani's gaze was serious. Zai said he would come back later. Kirani sat down on the monster's corpse. Zai was holding a sword in his hands. He told them to hurry up because he was getting impatient. The stranger's eyes glowed red. He was surprised that Kirani noticed. The stranger raised his hand. He noted that Zai is extremely observant. The main character was heading in his direction. Kirani asked the stranger who he was. Zai added that the stranger had been watching them from the moment they entered the 2nd floor. The stranger was shocked that Zai had noticed him from the start. His body was covered in a red aura. He claimed to have been discovered. The stranger told Kirani that he was adorable. He noted that he hadn't noticed at first, but Kirani can use mana spells. Zai's gaze was serious. The main character was thinking about the stranger using mana spells. Kirani noted that unlike Shin, he is a pro at this. The stranger was standing on a stone hill. Zai believed that the perfect skill is still far away and the reason for it is probably significant. The stranger suggested that it was hard to describe. He was wondering who taught Zai. There was anger in Kirani's eyes. The main character asked the stranger if he really thought he would answer him. A magical barrier appeared around the stranger. He felt that he had no other choice. Zai's cloak fluttered. Currents of air blew across Kirani's face. The main character was thinking that the stranger was using the strongest mana shockwave. Sho thought that the stranger was much higher level than Hijikata and Aoki. The stranger's eye began to glow red. He liked Zai's defiance. He thought it would be boring if Kirani acted differently. The main character was clutching a sword in his hand. He didn't know what exactly the stranger was interested in. There was a red bracelet on his arm. He thought Zai's question was a good one. The stranger held up his hand. For example, something like this, he said. The stranger attacked Kirani. He claimed that the mana spells were theirs. The stranger's aura covered the entire 2nd floor. He noted that he will not forgive those who use them. The stranger's technique left a huge mark on the ground. Kirani asked if the stranger had disposed of the others in the same way. The stranger braced himself for the next attack. He said he would leave her something to think about. Although, you will still die today, the stranger noted. Mana wings appeared behind him. The stranger thought it was unfair that Kirani had lost his luck as soon as he met him. The main character was shocked. He was thinking of the stranger's magic wings. A bright light radiated from its wings. Kirani thought about the individual skills of the long-eared and fairy races, which only confirmed that this guy had something to do with his past life. Zai activated the bracelet that was on his arm. He was glad that he had finally found a clue that related to his past life. Kirani knew better than to miss him. The main character's sword was covered in bright flames. In his hand, the stranger formed a magic projectile. He noted that now there is no point in playing cool. Zai watched the stranger as he continued to stand on the stone platform. Kirani charged into the battle. Zai attacked the stranger. The stranger froze, waiting for further action. He noted that attacking simpletons like Zai, who could only swing his sword a lot, wouldn't do him any harm. Kirani destroyed the stone hill. Behind the stranger, the magic wings continued to flutter. He ordered Kirani to try harder. The stranger thought it would be boring if that was the end of it. He assumed that these were the ones who were seizing the moment. The stranger threw a projectile in Kirani's direction. Shards of rock were flying all over the dungeon. The main character thought that he now had a general understanding of the stranger's attack style. Zai thought it was time to finish. Kirani lunged at him again. He activated the berserk ability. Kirani swung his sword. The stranger was baffled. Zai's attacks caused dust to rise in the dungeon. Kirani thought of projectiles and wings, which were a mix of siesta from the long-eared race and talon from the fairies. A look of fear crossed his face. He found it intimidating. The stranger sent a lot of projectiles at Kirani. He ordered Zai to stop smiling. The main character dodged his attacks. The stranger began to form a new spell. He was surprised that Zai had the ability to withstand his attacks. The entire dungeon was filled with the aura of a stranger. Kirani raised a hand to cover his face. Zai believed that he would have to retaliate here. We were shown fairies. The 8 races had their own unique methods for creating mana spells. The fairy race had Talon, the long-eared siesta. The winged woman put her hands to her chest. The ancient dragon race had a radial. The plot presented us with the image of radial. The 8 races shared their vision through their mana spell techniques. The huge monster was destroying everything in its path, improving a skill that will allow us to fight the Overlord's investment. That was the original purpose and reason for the mana spells. Zai's sword was covered in flames. The main character was thinking about how he couldn't use the power of his past life in this world before. Kirani knew that with the mana he had gained, he had managed to reanimate her. Zai's gaze was full of seriousness. He activated Boost. The main character rushed towards the stranger. Zai jumped off the ground. Kirani attacked the stranger. His gaze was directed at Zai. The stranger activated a magic shield. Kirani stopped his attack. The main character was taken aback. Zai thought the stranger's action was wrong because he should have dodged instead of defending himself. The stranger was baffled. He asked Kirani to repeat his words. Zai's sword pierced through the stranger's shield. There was a huge explosion in the dungeon. The main character watched the defeated stranger. Blood came out of his mouth. Kirani wiped it away. Zai stepped closer to him. Kirani noted that they could finally talk. The stranger's entire body was covered in blood. He didn't understand what Zai had just done. The stranger asked what kind of halo was above Kirani's head. He stated that mana spells are primarily theirs. Zai cut off the stranger's arm. He, in turn, began to yell in pain. Kirani ordered him to shut his mouth and said that he was the one asking the questions here. Zai's gaze was full of seriousness. He demanded the stranger's name. His face was covered in blood. He was angry. Kirani drew his sword again. Zai said that if the stranger wanted to die in agony, he could arrange it. The main character pointed his weapon at him. The stranger said that his name was Inamoto Gaku. He asked Sho to wait and added that his name was Kaiju Norans. Kirani's gaze was filled with disgust. He thought about how he hadn't heard that name in his previous life. Zai wondered if he should remember it. Kirani's sword was covered in flames. The main character asked about Kaidia's motive. He asked how Norans learned mana sorcery in the first place. Zai raised the sword above his head. Kirani asked if Kaidia could hear him. Norans was very frightened. Zai's hair covered one of his eyes. The main character suggested that Kaidia is connected with some kind of non-disclosure agreement. Norans' gaze was fixed on Zai. Aslan, idea, reboot? Kirani said. Sho informed him that if Kaidia knew a single word, he would have to answer. Norans didn't understand what Kirani was talking about. Zai thought about it. He was thinking that even though Kaidia used the magic of the long-eared and fairy races, he didn't know anything about these words. Kirani's last attack left a huge hole. The main character asked the following question. He asked how Norans had learned of its location. Kaidia stated that he did not know this. He reported that he just came with another guy who wanted to test his abilities and came across Zai. Norans only noticed that he was here because he had told her. Kirani asked who the guy was. Zai didn't understand what skill test Kaidia was talking about. Norans began to cough. Kirani was very angry. He knew that this was another prohibition. Zai's sword was pointed at Kaidia. Norins asked if it was true that Zai was going to feed him. Kaidia stated that he would try to talk to them so that Kiritani would join them. Norins noted that with the sea level, he would be welcomed with open arms. Kiritani's clothes were shadowed by the flames. I do not know what your motives are, but do you really think that I will join the assassin club? An enraged Zai asked. Norins began to yell. He called Kiritani a pathetic worm and told him not to be conceited just because he was able to defeat him. Kaidia added that there are monsters that are much higher than his level in terms of strength. Norris said that even if he died here, they would. The main character interrupted him. He didn't agree with him. Kiritani's eyes were filled with rage. Zai declared that they would not be able to defeat him. Kiritani noted that if Norins had known who he was, he would have been afraid to approach him. There was shock in Kaidia's eyes. Kiritani cut off his head. The main character clenched his fist. The system alerted Sho to multiple level ups and a new ability called Mana Bombardment of rank S. Kiritani continued to explore the screen. He assumed that this was his only reward. Sho thought that at least Kaidia knew something. Kiritani turned his attention to the new alert. The system notified Zai about the ability information update. The main character was given the title of Executioner of the X rank. Kiritani put a hand to his chin. He was thinking that the highest rank seen in the association was SSS. Zai assumed that if a skill's rank exceeded this rating, then it wouldn't be considered. Zai felt that the information update meant that this skill was already X-ranked when he received it. Kiritani thought that it might have something to do with his past life. Suddenly, Zai heard a sound. There was an explosion in the dungeon. Kishida held a weapon in his hands. Shin believed that if the alarm went off on the first floor, then there was a gap. Kiritani appeared before Kishida. He asked him to calm down. Sho asked where Aoki was. Shin pointed to the thick of the forest. Kishida stated that she was there. Zai thought about it. He assumed that the third floor boss had come out of the gap. A crowd of monsters was advancing on the hunters. The guy reported that they were survivors. He ordered everyone to take up positions. Kiritani placed the sword on his shoulder. C told Shin that these enemies were on him. He pointed out that with the help of the Poison Guild, they would be able to deal with them. Kishida asked what Kiritani's next move was. The main character turned his head in his direction. Zai stated that he would go after the boss. The magic projectiles continued to attack. One of the hunters deflected the projectile with his shield. He didn't know how to stop it. A huge magic projectile flew into the ground. The guy noted that in terms of complexity, they are comparable to a natural disaster. The hunters were confused. The guy announced a retreat, so the next wave was coming. Magic projectiles kept coming out of the monster. Lightning appeared in the air. Aoki attacked the monster. Sora was holding a weapon in her hands. Aoki thought it was bad. Sora knew that the continuous attacks didn't allow her to get any closer. Aoki gritted her teeth. She was thinking about what if Zai was here. Behind her was the main character. He asked if Aoki had any problems. Sora was taken aback. A smile appeared on Aoki's face. She was glad that Kiritani was okay. Zai jumped down from the stone platform. He noted that they would chat later. Kiritani asked about the current situation. Aoki reported that the dungeon core is inside this thing. In front of them was a monster that looked like a huge mountain. Sora noticed that the thing wasn't moving, but the onslaught of attacks kept them from getting any closer. The guys dodged the monster's attack. So we just need to defeat this thing. Kiritani asked. Sora noted that it's not as easy as it sounds. Aoki added that no one else can launch significant attacks here. Zai's gaze was fixed on the monster. Kiritani said the two of them could handle it. Sora was glad of that. Aoki asked if Sho had a good plan. The main character swung his sword. He thought it made perfect sense. Kiritani said that you need to cut everything that is cut. With a smile on her face, Aoki closed her eyes. Sora assumed that she needed to make her way to the core. Aoki rushed towards the monster. The monster let out a strong roar. Magic projectiles appeared in Sora's path. Aoki's weapon was filled with mana. Sora hit the magic projectiles. The shells were destroyed. Aoki was standing in front of the monster. Sora held her weapon with both hands. She was thinking that the distance between them was approximately 50 meters. Aoki stuck her weapon into the ground. The entire earth was covered with her lightning bolts. Her technique was directed towards the monster. Lightning struck him. The monster continued to roar. A strong wind rose around Sora. She assumed that the core was somewhere else. The tip of Aoki's weapon was filled with mana. The main character rushed towards the monster. He said he would deal with it. Kiritani sent all the points to mana. Zai's mana count has been increased to 180. In Kiritani's hands was a sword that was covered in bright flames. Zai used the mana bombardment ability. Kiritani attacked the monster. Zai was notified by the system that his ability was ranked as the area of attack was covered in flames. The monster was confused. A great roar rang out. Kirani destroyed the monster. The system notified the sea about the level increase. In his hands, Shin held a phone that said about the Magnus rift being stopped by 186 hunters. Kishida's gaze was directed at Kirani. He was talking about the hero who stopped Magnus, and Shin was glad that people were finally beginning to recognize him. The main character asked if Kishida was one of them in the beginning. Shin was taken aback. Kishida asked if Sho had been sulking at him ever since. Kirani thought about fame. He knew it was cool, but this time he got a more important reward. Zai was thinking that his level had increased to 42 and he had obtained an S-rank ability, Mana Bombardment. The main character said that from now on they have a lot of things to do. He informed them that they needed to set up a guild base and recruit hunters. Kishida followed Kirani. Shin was glad that they were finally getting new guild members. He was totally in agreement. Shin said that he will try to do everything in his power. The story takes us to the meeting room. The woman said that the butterfly was dead. She noted that all he did was talk and do unnecessary things. The man asked if the woman wanted to say that it was his fault. She raised a hand to her face. The woman said that it all started because of a lion that provoked a butterfly. Lev slammed his hand down on the table. He noted that he had only mentioned that someone else had learned the mana spell technique for the sake of their own comrades. The woman was looking at her hand. She thought Leo was just pretending to be nice. The woman suggested that Leo wanted to eliminate competitors. The guy was sitting on a chair. He said the dragon was right. The guy said that the case with the butterfly is too strange. The stranger agreed with him. He stated that Leo's recklessness caused the accident. Mana was concentrated in the lion's hand. He believed that they were also involved in this. Leo believed that they turned against him when the results were unequal. Absolutely everyone turned their attention to the young man. He stated that he had heard about the incident. His body was covered in mana. The young man said that the lion did what it was not necessary to do. Lev was taken aback. He thought the young man was wrong. Leo was saying that a mana spell was a resource for their power. He noted that if there is someone who can use the same method. The young man interrupted him. He asked him to forget about it because he understands the situation. The young man held his hands behind his back. He believed that many of them were too dependent on mana. He pointed out that while this was one of their strengths, they shouldn't be completely dependent on it. He said that over time, technologies will develop and they will catch up with them. The young man added that knowing this, the lion provoked one of them, and this led to death. He doubted the reasonableness of his decisions. Leo was baffled. The young man asked him what he thought about it. Lev raised his hand. He stated that he did not encourage the butterfly. Lev added that he did it on his own. He asked if they knew about it. The butterfly's abilities, I didn't think he would become one. This proves that our target's abilities are equal to ours, said Lev. The guy held up a hand. He assumed that their opponent had an SSS rank. A torch was lit in the meeting room. The guy noted that their opponent is one. He asked if the lion really thought he might be a threat to them. The lion's gaze was directed at the boy. Leo didn't think their opponent was capable of that. The young man thumped his cane on the floor. He stated that this is the last chance for Leo. Magic crystals were flying around the youth. The young man ordered Leo to take full responsibility for this matter and take care of it. He stated that until Leo completed this task, he was forbidden to open the door of Eve. We were shown a group of monsters. The Queen's overstretched army completely wiped out Aslan's continent. 8 races fought together, putting their lives on the line, but they left nothing but splinters and boulders behind. The huge monster was watching the many corpses. The dead soul race sacrificed their own bodies in the first war. The warriors were heading towards the monster. In the next war, Ruben caused the perpetual motion machine of the ancient dragon race to malfunction, causing them to go mad and try to commit suicide. In front of us was a falling woman. In the midst of all the chaos, our goddess Idea. The situation was getting worse. A monster was standing in the middle of the battlefield. But the horrors didn't stop there. Due to the treachery of 3 of the monster race, we were facing a third war. Separation and mitosis. The first thing I had to do was get rid of the traitors among my own people. The main character attacked the traitors. At that time, I believed that I, who was considered the god of the sword, became the executioner. The main character was holding a sword in his hands. The plot showed us the range of unpredictable taste of Magnus. Kirani thought it was good for the first time. He wanted to eat the capsule. After absorbing it, a strong glow appeared. The system notified Zai about his stats. Kirani thought about his nickname Guillotine. He thought it was too straightforward. Zai suggested that it was the effect of the hangman's ability. Suddenly, Kirani's phone rang. Zai picked it up. He noted that this happened faster than he thought. When Sho came out of the house, he saw Agawa standing in front of him. He asked her not to overdo the exercise. Kirani said that even though her mana allergy was gone, she had only just recovered. Agawa wiped her face with a towel. Irie said she was fine because it was just a light jog. Agawa assumed that she was in better shape now than when she was allergic. The main character folded his hands. He assumed it was the result of the capsule. Irie showed her phone to Zai. She asked if it was true. There was a newscast on her phone about the relationship between Aoki Sora and Kiritani. The news anchor reported that the main character of today became the most discussed news. He noted that Sho's relationship with Aoki Sora sparked a lot of discussions. The host talked about how even during the raid together in Magnus' Cradle, they had demonstrated perfect teamwork. Aoki and Kiritani were shown in close-up. The host stated that their relationship began with the breaking of the moon. Kiritani started forward. Igawa asked if Sho was really dating Aoki Sora. Kiritani said that these are just ordinary rumors. A smile appeared on Irie's face. Igawa kept her hands behind her back. She asked what kind of girls Zai liked. Kiritani said that he likes unproblematic girls. He added that he had gone. A look of hopelessness crossed Igawa's face. Takabana was holding a phone in her hand. Zai pulled out his chair to sit down. He asked if Kaoru even wore a uniform on weekends. Kiritani guessed that Takabana was really busy. The major said that criminals do not care what day they decide to commit a crime. Her gaze was directed at Kiritani. Zai asked what happened to the case in the end. Kaoru noted that, as Kiritani said, they discovered this during the investigation of Hijikata's case. We were shown the bracelet. Takabana reported that they found a bracelet called Undo during their research. The major added that it was needed in order to neutralize the silencers of power, but this technology is a decade ahead of the technology of their country. Zai held the mug to his mouth. He suggested that representatives of other countries were involved in this case. Takabana's gaze was serious. Kaoru was almost certain of it. The major noted that they have narrowed down the list of suspects to 3 main foreign suspects. We were shown 3 men. Takabana stated that the first one was Professor Boris from the northern continent. She was talking about a rumor that he was conducting highly suspicious experiments. Kaoru noted that the second suspect was a man from Asia, Professor Chen Wen. The major added that this is an entrepreneur associated with illegal business. Takabana reported on the last suspect, who hailed from the strongest countries, Professor Steve. Kaoru pointed out that he's a person who doesn't usually show up at public events. The major said that he was only interested in investigations, so they didn't have much information about him. Sho's gaze was directed at Kaoru. He was talking about a lunatic, a criminal, and a mad scientist. Kiritani wondered if the information from Inamoto was reliable. Then one of them is connected with the bracelet. Zai put the mug down on the table. He asked if Kaoru was sure about the man called Inamoto Gaku. Takabina asked if Kiritani understood that she was a personal detective. The main character got up from his chair. He thought Kaoru was more professional than detectives. Zai noted that she has the opportunity to repay the debt to him. He asked Takabana to contact him as soon as the results were available. The major put a hand to her forehead. She said that she understood Zai's request. The plot takes us to the next day. There was a clipboard on the table with a list on it. Kiritani was surprised that everyone didn't pass again. Kishida put his hand to his chest. He thought Zai was too strict. Kishida asked if Kiritani understood how difficult it was to check his results and respond. The main character reported a refusal. He noted that he only needs elite fighters. Shin stared at the clipboard. Kishida said that he didn't want to be a member of a guild with only 2 members. Shin noted that when C hosted it, it wasn't so selective. The main character thought about it. Zai was thinking about Shin's talent, which was related to mana spells. Kiritani thought that there were far fewer people who could use mana spells than he thought. Zai put a hand to his chin. Suddenly, someone opened the door to the room. Kiritani asked who else had signed up for the interview. A girl was standing in front of them. Zai was sure that they were done with everyone. Shin thought the girl was pretty. Zai's gaze was fixed on her. Kiritani apologized to the girl and informed her that the interviews were over. There was a smile on her face. The girl said she knew. She noted that this is why she came at this time. The girl handed her a business card. She said she was happy to meet Kiritani C. The girl said that she was a hunter from the Global Management of America. Her name was Michelle Roslin. The main character leaned his jacket against his face. He said he wasn't interested. Michelle was taken aback. Roslin turned to look at him. Michelle stated that she wasn't here to lure him to their guild, but to bring hunters to them. Roslin added that she was here to recommend the hunters from their company to your guild. Zai continued to hold the jacket up to his face. He was thinking about the recommendation of the American hunters. The main character reported that he suspected that Michelle had done research before coming here. Kiritani was surprised that there are hunters in America who want to transfer to the newly founded guild. Roslin sat down in a chair. She noted that the income of hunters depends on their rank and not on nationality. Michelle stated that the world of hunters is slowly moving to a national level. Roslin added that some people want to test their strength while others study future guilds, so they chose to transfer here. Michelle handed the clipboard to Kiritani. She reported that people were betting on his guild, which proved the importance of his guild. Zai picked up her clipboard. He suggested that the recruitment of foreigners is illegal. Kiritani considered. He noted that this person has a special resume, an S-rank killer capable of becoming a striker if required. Zai continued. Kiritani handed the clipboard to Michelle. Rosalind realized that he was referring to Fina Chundra. Michelle revealed that they became hunters after recovering from a mana allergy. The main character was wary. He thought it was strange that there were so many healers on the list. Kiritani assumed that they were the ones who learned about his guild's needs. A memory of Irie popped up in his mind. Zai was surprised that they even mentioned mana allergy. The main character put his hand to his chin. He thought Michelle was competent. Zai stated that there was something he was interested in. He asked me to arrange a meeting with Finn. A notification came to Rosalind's phone. Michelle said it wasn't necessary. The guy was holding a phone in his hands. Zai didn't understand what she meant. The guy was heading towards the entrance of the building. Rosalind said he came with her. A happy Kishida stood next to Kiritani. The main character introduced himself and named his guild. Michelle and Finn were sitting across from him. Chundra said he was glad to meet you and introduced himself. Shin was glad to see Finn. He said that he was in favor of accepting it. Kiritani talked about Chundra changing guilds. He said that the previous one didn't look bad. Zai asked why he decided to change guilds. Finn stated that he was starting to feel like he had outgrown the guild in terms of level, so he wanted to transfer to a more promising guild. Zai was holding his resume in his hands. Kiritani thought he had a lot of confidence in his head. The main character said that he thought about another reason. The main character poked himself in the heart. He asked if Finn felt any pain. Chundra was taken aback. He didn't understand how Zai did it. A memory of his past life popped up in his mind. The young man was holding his heart. He was talking about persistent chest pain. From what I can see, the higher you rank, the greater the pain becomes, Zai was saying. He asked if he was right. Kiritani said that Finn had visited many different guilds, but had not found a solution to the problem, which led him to the simple conclusion that nothing could cure his pain. The sun was bright outside the window. Chundra asked if Zai knew the method. The main character stated that this is so. Kiritani considered. He thought that he could see why Finn was suffering so much. Zai believed that even now, his mana was running out of control. Streams of mana could be seen all around Finn. Kiritani was thinking that the healers must have known that the problem was too much mana flow. The main character believed that their journey here directly speaks to their despair. Finn closed his eyes. Shanda has stated that he will enter into a reboot. Zai noted that he did not speak about its adoption. The guys were shocked by Kiritani's words. He stated that the interview was not over yet. Zai put his hand on the table. Kiritani reported on the transition in the practical part. We are transported to the basement of the guild, the training arena. Finn was standing in the middle of the training hall. Michelle asked him if everything was really all right. Rosalind noted that Mr. Kiritani is an experienced striker. Michelle said that Chundra, as the main healer, will be difficult to resist Zai. Michelle's eyes were troubled. Rosalind added that they haven't even received any proof that his problem can be solved. Michelle said that as his agent, she couldn't stand to watch him try to pass a test like this in silence. Chundra's weapon was emitting mana. He told Michelle not to worry about it. Finn thanked her for introducing him to a good guild. In front of him was Zai. Chundra was sure that Kiritani was responsible for his words. Rosalind was excited. Finn noted that he still needs to sign a contract. The main character put the sword on his shoulder. Chundra asked if he could use a gun. Kiritani noted that this fight will still end quickly, so he didn't care. Finn charged. Zai was interested in this. Chundra swung his weapon. He attacked Kiritani. The main character threw his sword on the floor. Finn was taken aback. He was surprised that Zai had done so. Kiritani took hold of his shirt. Zai threw Chundra against the wall. Blood came out of his mouth. Finn noted that he had never heard of such an ability. There was a dent in the wall of the training hall. Zai said that he only gave him a light push. Finn was angry. He used the SS rank super regeneration ability. Chundra attacked her again. He believed that he really hit the jackpot. Finn attacked Kiritani from above. There was a huge explosion. The main character dodged his attack. He asked if Finn should hunt the big boss. Kiritani believed that this was a habit developed during trips to high-ranked dungeons. Zai thought of Finn swinging his weapon wide and grazing a huge amount of space. Kiritani attacked with his foot. Chundra blocked his attack with a magic shield. The main character thought about it. He was thinking about the mana barrier he had created. Zai thought that Finn's reaction speed was good. Kiritani tripped Chundra. Zai thought that the barrier made the upper hull unstable. Finn was baffled. Kiritani slammed his fist into the mana barrier. Finn was thinking about the fact that Zai had just aimed at the weak spot of his ability. Chundra knew that he needed to create the mana barrier again. The main character broke through Finn's defense. Chundra's weapon was emitting mana. He was angry. Finn struck at Zai. Kiritani turned his attention to the spot Finn had hit. He was thinking of stimulating the restoration of the body's covering so that Zai would become infected. Kiritani was curious. A grin spread across Chandra's face. He said that if Zai didn't pull herself together and give up soon, he would regret it. Finn thought the spreading tumor was amazing. A lump appeared on Zai's neck. Kiritani thought that the infection had now spread to the thyroid gland. The main character touched his neck with his hand. He thought of the ability to cause a tumor to affect vital organs, which is equal to the ability to diagnose and heal people. Kiritani cured Fina's infection. Chundra was shocked by this. The main character rushed to the attack. He noted that it was an interesting attack that Finn showed, but regardless, it's all just an ability. The office light was on. Chundra reported that he had completely lost. Finn tilted his head down. He pointed out that Zai's method cured his contagion ability and that it could also release him from pain. Kiritani noted that he has a good mindset. He said that he recognized the strength of Chundra and asked to move on to the contract. Finn was glad of that. Michelle was holding a document in her hands. She asked them to wait. Rosalind read the contract, which stated that there were no circumstances under which the guild was not required to monitor the data leak. Michelle put her hand on the table. She noted that in addition to this, there was a 10-year contract, which Rosalind considered tyrannical. Finn asked her to calm down. Chundra stated that Kiritani's help is worth the conditions. Finn signed a contract with the guild. The main character shook his hand. Zai welcomed him to the reboot. Chundra informed him that from now on he would call him master. There was a pen on the contract. Kiritani asked if he could drop the formalities and just call him Finn. Chundra agreed with him. Kishida was overjoyed. He introduced himself to Finn. "Please don't hesitate to ask for help, little sister," said a satisfied Shin. Chundra was angry with him. "He asked me not to call him by that nickname because he's a guy." Kishida was shocked by this. He thought Finn looked like a girl. The sun shone through the window. Kishida assumed that Chundra was just shy about having the same guys in the guild. Finn ordered him to shut his mouth. He stated that if Shin called him a girl again. Kishida interrupted him. He still couldn't believe it. The main character crossed his arms. Kiritani thought about tank, melee, and healer. He was glad that they had finally assembled a minimal team. Zai believed that the only thing left to do was train during real fights. The plot tells us about the actions that took place at this time in the Japanese Association of Hunters. It was getting dark outside. The man asked if it was true. He crossed his fingers. The stranger said it was true. He stated that in a week's time, a monster would appear in Shizuoka. The plot was introduced to us by Oda Makido, who was a colleague of Wakamatsu Kenzu, the creator of the Force Limiters. The old man's gaze was serious. He informed them that they needed to gather the guild masters. Finn put a hand to his chest. He thought it was amazing that by controlling the circulation of his mana, he completely got rid of the pain. Chundra sat down on the floor. The main character reported that because of too much confidence in abilities, people do not even guess about the simple solutions to their problems. He asked Finn not to spread this information to other hunters. Chundra said that he had heard about Professor Steve, who is currently doing research on a similar topic. Kiritani turned his head in his direction. He asked if he was investigating a method similar to mana magic. Chundra stated that this was the case. Finn added that the professor said that the study will help to use the status more effectively. A halo appeared above Zai's head. Kiritani believed that Professor Steve was one of the suspects in the development of cancer. Zai believed that with such a technical background, it wouldn't take him long to discover the mana sorcery method. But excellence was the peak and foundation of the techniques of the 8 great races. Kiritani closed his eyes. The main character understood that such a thing could not be detected, appealing only to science and time. Zai didn't think there was anything to be proud of. Kiritani asked Finn to finish the lecture and move on to the next stage. Zai was talking about a real fight. A huge monster was standing in front of Chundra and Kishida. Finn asked Shin to do everything right. He told him not to dodge. Kishida said he was doing everything right. Shin crossed his weapons. He activated the principle of duality. Kishida blocked the monster's attack. Kiritani was standing behind Shin. Zai assumed that Kishida was used to his new ability, the principle of duality. Shin swung his weapon. He threw a punch at the monster. The monster bit Kishida's arm. Shin was taken aback. Finn pointed his weapon at the monster. He thought Kishida was stupid. Chundra healed Kishida's wound. Shin was amazed that his injuries immediately recovered. A smile appeared on Kishida's face. He thanked Finn. Shin attacked the monster again. Finn charged into the fray. Chundra cut the monster in two. Kishida was giving Chundra thumbs up. Shin believed that Finn was born to be a striker. Chundra asked Kishida to stop talking nonsense and making stupid mistakes. The sun was shining brightly outside. Shin said he made no mistakes. Finn ordered him to close his mouth. Chundra pointed out that he would not treat Kishida next time. Shin thought it was too much. Kiritani was holding a sword in his hands. Zai thought that even high-ranked guilds usually prepared for a class A dungeon, but since they were in sync, Zai thought that the 3 of them could handle it. The main character suggested that this training can be completed. In their hands, the guys held their weapons. Finn said that the rest of the mods will be dealt with by sea. Chundra thought this dungeon was a bit strange. Kirani asked what Finn meant by that. Chundra turned his attention to the dead monster. Finn informed Zai about the A-class dungeons that he went through in America. Finn talked about how there weren't such strong monsters. Chundra noted that he had heard about this phenomenon because of the upcoming monster in America. One of the trees in the dungeon collapsed. Kishida didn't know what kind of monster it was. Finn told me that the first monster appeared in America 20 years after the first rift. Chundra asked about how long ago faults have been appearing in Japan. Shin was taken aback. I'm sure it's only 11 years old, but it's already 12 if you think about it, Kishida replied. A memory of the monster popped up in Finn's mind. Chundra said that he had heard that in Japan, over the past few months, faults began to occur more often. He suggested that this fact is a harbinger of a quietly approaching catastrophe. Kirani considered. He was thinking of the monster. Outside, the sun had set. Igawa stood happily in the middle of Sho's kitchen. She greeted Kirani. Irie asked him what he wanted for dinner. The main character scratched his head. He asked if it was too early for dinner. Igawa asked them to ignore it. Irie noticed that Zai had a guest. Kirani was taken aback. He didn't understand who Igawa was calling a guest. Ayaki said it was her. Sora put her hand to her mouth because of coughing. Ayaki revealed that because Sho didn't keep his promise, she decided to come to him herself. Irie held a ladle in her hands. She asked Sora and Sho to enjoy the conversation while she prepared dinner. Ayaki thanked her for that. Sho thought about how Igawa had already run away. Kirani put a hand to his head. The main character stated that he didn't know that Ayaki was so sociable. Sora held the mug in her hands. Ayaki reported that Irie looked very young, but they were the same age as her. Sora said that his sister was friendly and sweet, so they immediately found a common language. Ayaki almost dropped her mug. The main character stated that Igawa is not his own sister. Kirani said that Irie is a relative of a teammate with whom they were very close. Zai added that he died during the incident. Night was falling smoothly outside. Ayaki found this rather unexpected. Your efforts in the team are one thing, but I didn't expect you to be such a good person, Sora said. A lightning bolt appeared on Ayaki's arm. She asked Zai to change the subject since that's the reason she's here. Sora aimed a lightning bolt at the mug. Kirani saw what Ayaki had learned. Sora concentrated the lightning bolt in her finger. Ayaki noted that thanks to Magnus, she has achieved success. Sora added what happened as soon as she understood the method. Ayaki found it strange that she hadn't done this before. The main character started clapping Ayaki. Sora was confused. Zai said that he expected this from the top of the country. Kirani noted that Sora's skills are on a completely different level. Ayaki doesn't even laugh at her. She noted that she was waiting for the fulfillment of the promise Zai had made to her during the Magnus trek. Kirani threw a book on the table. Zai said that if Ayaki follows what is written in this book, she will go to the next level. The main character folded his hands. Kirani knew that there was nothing about mana sorcery. Zai believed that this was just the base of the foundation. Sora thought for a moment. Ayaki handed the book to Sho. Sora thought it would be more useful for her to learn this in a duel rather than memorize the theory. Ayaki said that she wanted Kirani to teach her directly. Lights were on everywhere in Zai's house. Kirani agreed to her request. He said that he still has a training hall. Sora said that in that case, she would go. Ayaki turned her attention to her phone. She was surprised by what she saw. Her phone said something about the coming of the monster. A silhouette of a monster appeared in Zai's mind. He was surprised that the monster had appeared in Shizuoka. The main character thought that he was waiting for this, but everything is happening too fast. Kirani dialed Shin on the phone in a moment. When Ayaki was heading out of the house, Sora announced that she was going to the guild. She mentioned that they meet in Shizuoka. Ayaki thanked Irie for the tea. Igawa told Sora to come back again. The main character asked Shin where he was now. Kishida was holding a phone in his hands. Shin stated that he was on his way to the guild base right now. He asked if Kirani had seen the message from the association. Zai turned his gaze to the letter from the association. Kirani claimed to have seen him. He was surprised by the presence of the guild masters. Zai suggested that there was little time left to resolve this situation. Kirani continued his conversation with Kishida. The main character announced that he was moving to Shizuoka right away. He asked Shin to prepare the armor and wait for him with Finn. Kirani was heading for the exit when Igawa called out to him. Irie crossed her arms over her chest. She asked him to be careful. Zai's face was serious. He said he was moving forward. Kirani's car sped along the highway. Shin stated that Kaiju is expected to appear in Shizuoka. Kishida said the name Maxby. Shin and Finn were sitting in Sia's car. Kishida didn't understand why he should be given a name. Chundra thought it was the same as the typhoon names, but he assumed it was some sort of identification number to show that he was completely different from the other monsters. Shin pictured him in his head. He said that after Fina's statement, he felt terrible. The main character continued to drive. He He asked Chundra if his allergy had gone away after the split. Kirani was looking in Finn's direction. Chundra said so. He claimed that he survived the disaster and after some time recovered. Zai asked when Finn became a hunter. Kirani held the steering wheel with his hand. Chundra noted that he became a hunter after recovering, a month after being discharged. Kirani thought of Igawa. He thought of Finn as the same as Irie. Zai was thinking that the mana allergy was gone after the split disaster. He assumed that she was too. In the main character's head, a memory of Irie's words appeared where she stated that she wanted to become a hunter. Chundra was sitting in the backseat. I have heard that one Copic piece was in a similar situation, said Finn. He assumed that Zai was worried about her. Kirani pointed out that this was true, and he asked Finn if it was because they had more mana than normal people. Chundra looked thoughtful. He thought it was more of a yes than a no. Finn noted the ability he received after awakening, Mana Reactor. In front of us was a mage who was holding his weapon. Mana Reactor, an SS class ability that temporarily increases the owner's mana by 3 times. It was something that any spellcaster would envy. Chundra tilted his head. Kirani noted that Finn is even more talented than he thought. He didn't understand why the other guilds let Chandra go so easily. Finn tried to tell me. Kishida interrupted him. He asked Zai to look there. Shin noted that they even brought military helicopters. Helicopters were visible in the sky. In the mirror, Kirani watched the startled Finn. Zai picked up speed. He thought they should hurry. The main character was heading to Shizuoka. Military personnel and helicopters were stationed all over the city. Kishida noticed them. Shin noticed that it was even more serious than he thought. Zai's gaze was directed at the war machine. Kirani stated that Kaiju is making its first appearance in this country. The shadow of military vehicles fell on the Hunter Association's operational headquarters building. The main character said that he would go to the association. He asked Kishida to wait a bit. Kirani sat down behind a chair. There were hunters all around him. Zai knew that this was an emergency. The main character believed that this is why the atmosphere is not at all the same as in the situation with the Cradle of Magnus. The man was standing at the microphone stand. He thanked everyone for responding to the call so quickly. The man noted that they did not have time, so he wanted to immediately determine the purpose of command and distribution of positions. Zai's gaze was fixed on him. The man reported that they wanted to ask the Reload Guild to take on Maxby and Vanguard. The hunter's gaze was directed at Kirani. The man noted that they have already shown their competence by conquering the Cradle of Magnus. He added that they were recently joined by a Class S hunter. The man placed his hand on the counter. He said that no one objected. Kirani's response came to life. It was disconcerting that everyone's attention was focused on him. The main character didn't want to stand out too much, but he knew that there was nothing he could do now. Zai's face was confident. He said that he would do his best to meet the expectations placed on him. Helicopters continued to circle the city. Shin asked Kirani if this kaiju would definitely show up. Finn was taken aback by Kishida's words. Shin noted that they have been waiting for him for several days, and added that more than a week has passed since the association published the forecast. An image of the association's members appeared in his mind. Kishida reported that other guilds were already starting to crack down. Zai's gaze was directed at Finn. He assumed that they often have them. Kirani asked if the United States has learned to accurately predict their occurrence. Chundra said that there are also no perfect forecasting methods. Finn noted that everyone tries to be ready for battle, so they react quickly. Kishida put his hands on his side. He believed that they were all gathered for no reason. Chundra noted that this would hardly have happened. Finn added that the chairman does not look like a simpleton, unlike Shin. Kirani picked up his phone. Kishida was shocked by what he saw on the phone. He stated that Kaiju had appeared. Shin pointed out that it wasn't here. There was a news item on his phone about the appearance of a kaiju in Yokohama. The helicopters headed towards the city. The main character was thinking that kaiju appears in Yokohama at a time when all the forces of the association are concentrated in Shizuoka. Kirani thought they were trapped. Kishida said they should hurry too. Zai was thinking that when they were done with him, they would need to go to the association. The plot takes us to the city of Yokohama. Maxby attacked the city. The residents of the city were very scared. The shadow of a monster was visible above the guy. Maxby swept everything in his path. His paws left huge footprints. Helicopters circled the monster. Aoki landed straight from the helicopter. Sora's gaze was full of seriousness. She watched Maxby smash the city. Aoki guessed that the monster was about 50 meters tall. Sora was holding a weapon in her hands. Aoki was thinking about how Maxby was so huge that her eyesight was off. The monster pointed its paws at the city. Sora assumed that it was absorbing mana from the environment. Aoki thought that this was the first time she had encountered such a thing. Sora's hand was covered in lightning. The man asked Aoki to relax. Sora was taken aback. He said that based on Aoki's words, the monster was indeed a giant. The man asked to charge Maxby with his strongest attack. Sora's weapon was covered in lightning. Aoki accepted the order. She set the gun on the floor. Sora started creating lightning bolts. Aoki's weapon was overflowing with lightning. Sora activated many abilities for her strongest attack. Aoki attacked the monster. A bolt of lightning shot toward Maxby. The sounds of lightning could be heard everywhere. The monster absorbed Sora's attack. Aoki was shocked. She knew she'd taken a direct hit. Maxby's eyes glowed red. Sora was surprised that there wasn't a scratch on it. Maxby let out a loud roar. Aoki was scared. Sora didn't understand how the monster did this. She was thinking about reflecting and absorbing magic. Aoki grabbed her weapon again. Sora guessed that her attack was too weak. Maxby was heading in her direction. Aoki barely managed to stay on her feet. Ohara's gaze was full of seriousness. He asked the fighters to spare no effort because they must stop the monster. A squad of tank, healer, and striker was ready to attack. The hunters accepted his order. Maxby continued to destroy the city. The hunters were confused. The woman didn't understand why their attacks didn't work. He assumed that Maxby would neutralize any magic. The monster waved its paw. Maxby's punch destroyed the building. The hunters dodged his attack. The monster opened its mouth. Maxby let out a loud roar. Suddenly, the wreckage of the building flew up into the air. The hunters were suspended in zero gravity. Ohara suggested that a change in gravity was applied. Aoki was climbing over the rubble of buildings. Her gaze was focused on the monster. Sora was taken aback. Aoki started to fall down. She believed that the monster had lifted them up in the air to bring them down. With the help of the technique, Aoki landed on the ground. Sora was thinking about magic immunity and changing gravity. She didn't understand why the monster had two whole abilities. The shadow of Maxby's paw appeared over Sora. She said she wouldn't let anyone get hurt again. The monster aimed its punch at Sora. Aoki braced herself for his attack. She noted that she herself will accept all his attacks. The monster struck at Sora. A magic barrier appeared around Aoki. Sora could barely stand on her feet. Blood appeared near Aoki's mouth. She knew she was still alive. Sora reckoned that if she dragged her time out, reinforcements would arrive. Aoki knew she had to hold out until then. The monster's entire body was covered in mana. Sora was shocked by this. Maxby used one of the techniques to attack. Aoki's eyes started to bleed. The monster hit the spot where Sora was standing. Aoki flew out of the way. A startled Ohara approached her. He asked her if she was still alive. Aoki said yes. Sora tried to get up. Aoki knew she had to hold on. Sora thought about how she needed to be patient a little longer. Her eyes were filled with fear. The monster continued to roar. Aoki was very scared. Maxby headed for a place that was full of people. This was what Sora dreaded the most. Aoki assumed that he was targeting civilians. Sora rushed towards him. Genosuke raised his shield above his head. Ohara used the unwavering alliance technique. Aoki reached the bridge. Maxby prepared to create a magic projectile. Lightning sparked around Sora. Aoki knew that if she didn't stop his attack now, the consequences would be disastrous. The monster fired a projectile towards the humans. Sora used a defensive barrier to block his attack. Aoki's shield wasn't enough protection. There was a huge explosion due to Maxby's attack. Sora fell to the ground. Dust rose on the battlefield. Aoki was badly injured. The monster was standing right in front of her. Sora was thinking about the power of Kaiju. Maxby's paw began to bleed. Aoki turned her attention to Kiritani's sword. Sora was glad that Sho had finally arrived. The main character landed on the ground. Sai noted that Maxby had given her a good beating. Aoki fainted as she fell on top of Kiritani. She tried to apologize to Sai. The main character asked her to relax and asked her to tell him later. Kiritani handed Aoki to Kishida. He ordered Shin to take her to Finn. Kishida asked what Sho would do. Finn healed the hunter's wounds. Kiritani said that he would deal with the monster. Sai said that when Shin and Finn were done with Aoki's treatment, they would have to start evacuating the population. Kiritani started toward Maxby. Shin asked Sai to be careful. Kiritani was holding a sword in his hands. His gaze was focused on the monster. The main character noted that he did not think that he would meet him in such a place. Kiritani pointed his weapon at him. Sai reported that the monster's name was Overlord. Maxby stood in the middle of the remains of a ruined city. Kiritani thought Maxby was one of the overlords. Sai was thinking that the monster was a low-ranking scout who had been sent to this planet to gather information. Kiritani believed that Maxby was incapable of defending anything because he was only filled with hostility. Sai raised his sword. The main character thought that the monsters that suddenly pop out and destroy everything around him do not like it all. Kiritani said he would wipe it out. Sai rushed into battle. The hunters were watching Kiritani. He thought it was fast. He didn't understand why his attacks were working. Sai dodged Maxby's punch. The main character thought that attacking and defending in mana battles was very simple because neutralizing magic and defending against it. Kiritani swung his sword. I'm not just playing with words. The first magic cycle protects against other people's attacks, so you can't break through it, but you can bypass it with another cycle from above and so on. Zai continued to think. Kirani wounded Maxby. He thought that the monster's defense was only one cycle. The surprised hunters continued to watch the duel. He didn't understand the meaning of Kirani's attacks, because the difference in size and mana between them is too big. The main character continued to launch attacks on the monster. Maxby let out his roar. Zai climbed onto the monster's paw. Maxby tried to hit him. Kirani jumped away from his attack. The monster's paws were pointed in Zai's direction. Kirani was running away from him. Maxby let out another roar. He used the gravity technique on Zai. The main character watched the monster from a high place. Zai guessed that Maxby had thrown him about a kilometer away. Kirani thought it was a good thing for him. The system notified Zai of receiving a new ability and increasing the X rank. A halo appeared above Kirani's head. Zai rushed towards the monster. Maxby stretched out his paw to try and catch it. The leader swung his sword. He cut off the monster's arm. Zai continued his attack. His blade burned with a bright flame. Maxby tried to deflect Kirani's attack. The monster continues to roar ferociously. Uharu was shocked by what he saw. The woman couldn't believe it. She watched Zai suppress the kaiju alone. Jinasuke stated that he couldn't believe his eyes. He was thinking about the monster losing to a single hunter. Maxby was furious. Kirani became alert. He was thinking about the attack that the monster had defeated Aoki. Zai watched the ruined city. Kirani knew that there was no point in killing him, because if he did, the city would be reduced to rubble. Zai believed that he should take the attack on himself. Maxby activated the magic projectile. He was heading towards Zai. The main character activated the berserk ability. Kirani tried to take the attack on himself. Bright flames could be seen all around him. Zai estimated that the distance to the monster was about 100 meters. Kirani thought that as soon as the attack stopped, he should immediately move and finish him off. Zai concentrated his mana in his legs. Overlords tend to be gigantic in size, so you need high mobility to fight them. And the first means to travel long distances, which the 8 races developed, was. The main character activated the secret technique jerk. Kirani started toward Maxby. The monster readied itself for his attack. Kirani's sword was covered in bright flames. Zai used the Titan Hunt technique. Everything around the main character was covered in mana. Zai chopped off part of Maxby's limbs. The monster let out a roar. Uhara turned his head in the direction of the hunters. He said that now their attacks should also work. He asked them to push as hard as they could. The hunters opened fire on the monster. Many attacks were flying towards Maxby. He strained his eyes. The main character declared that he was finished. Zai put mana into his punch. Kirani's attack was heading towards the monster. Maxby was defeated. The system notified Zai about the level up and getting a new ability. Surprised, the hunters watched Kirani. The man asked if the monster was really dead. The young man was amazed that the main character defeated Kaiju alone. He asked which guild Zai was from. Kirani's eyes were fixed on the screen. Zai thought that this power from the previous world was also available to him now. The main character was standing on top of Maxby's troop. He was shocked that Kirani had cut off the monster's head. He asked if he had any free seats in the reboot. The hunter asked Zai to turn this way. Kirani closed his eyes. He thought about trying out the ability later. Kirani knew that right now he needed to finish everything here. Zai shoved his hands in his pockets. The plot takes us to the Hunters Association Hospital. Aoki stated that Sho has been basking in the glory of the past few years. Sora noticed that even the other members of his guild started appearing frequently in the news. Kirani asked if Aoki was in the papers. Sora's entire body was covered in cuts and bruises. The number 1 hunter in Japan is hard and so on, Aoki replied in distress. The main character put his hand to his head. Kirani noted that this made Irie all flustered. Sora assumed that this shocked Igawa. Aoki said that she herself did not expect such a defeat. Sora's arm was broken. Aoki noted that she still hadn't thanked Sho. Her gaze was directed at Kirani. Sora thanked him for saving her. Aoki said that if it wasn't for Sho, she wouldn't be here. The sun was shining brightly outside. Kirani understood why Aoki was willing to sacrifice herself, but he asked her to be careful. Sora looked confused. The main character noted that many people are waiting for Aoki's return. Kirani was standing outside Aoki's room. Sora thanked him for his kind words. Aoki noted that she would never have thought that Sho could be so empathetic. Zai announced that he was leaving. Sora's gaze was directed at Kirani. She was surprised that Zai was already leaving. Aoki asked if Kirani was in a hurry to get somewhere. Zai's face was shadowed by the sun. The main character said that he was going to a funeral ceremony. Kishida was looking at an article about the second SS class hunter in Japan, Kirani Sho. We were shown how Kirani fights with Kaiju. The article also included photos of Aoki's rescue and helping the hunters. Shin was shocked that the media had been making headlines about them for days. He was glad that even he was a celebrity now. Sho walked out of Sora's room and found Kishida sitting in the corner. Kiritani asked what Shin was reading with such interest. Kishida said he didn't read anything. Shin asked if she had finished. The main character opened the screen to view his skills. Kishida thought Kiritani and Aoki got along well. Zai stated that he already had a lot to keep in mind, and he asked Shin not to distract him from his work. Zai opened the stats window. The screen showed the main character his current skills. We were shown the spirituality skill, a power source of boost that existed back in the past world, an indicator of one's soul, and also what makes gods gods. Kiritani tried to invest bonus points in the stat. Zai was thinking of a problem that prevented him from increasing his ability with bonus points. The system notified him of the impossibility of promotion. Zai's eyes were fixed on the screen. Kiritani suggested that some special actions are needed, as in the case of the executioner. Zai felt that this was impossible. The main character was thinking about an idea that he thought was worth checking out. A group of hunters stood waiting for the funeral ceremony to begin. The hunters' faces were filled with sadness and despair. Kiritani said that today they gathered here to honor the memory of the victims, as well as to express their deepest sympathy to their families, who are now the hardest of all. The atmosphere at the ceremony was very oppressive. The main character was standing behind a wooden counter. Zai felt that it was presumptuous of him, but in order to ease the burden on the families of the dead, the Reload Guild would donate half of its reward for the last mission. The hunters began to applaud her. The system notified Kiritani of receiving spirituality. The main character started down the stairs. Zai reflected on the spirituality that grows if you increase your attention, as in the previous world. Kiritani believed that in a capitalist society, even the power of the soul can be bought with money. He thought it made everything easier. The girl was talking about her father. Kiritani froze in shock. In front of him was a little girl who couldn't stop crying. Zai's gaze was blank. The protagonist thought that he had seen similar scenes many times in the past world, but he still couldn't get used to them. Kiritani noticed Finn standing next to him. Chundra noted that Zai's speech was excellent. Finn was holding a folder of documents in his hands. He informed Kiritani that these were the documents he requested. Zai thanked him for providing them. The documents stated that they were completely secret. Chundra asked why she needed them. Finn was sure Kiritani had dealt with Maxby. The main character said that you need to see everything with your own eyes to make sure. Kiritani's eye was covered by his hair. Zai was talking about who he needed to track down right now. The weather was clear outside. The man was holding a suitcase in his hands. The man was agitated and constantly looked around. His face was frightened. Zai noted that he had a lot of luggage. Kiritani was sitting on the windowsill, looking at him. Zai asked if the man was going out. The man was amazed that Kiritani was here. Zai rushed towards him. The main character was standing right in front of the man, who was very scared. Kiritani couldn't help thinking that the person who had predicted the appearance of Kaiju more accurately than the Americans had only made a mistake with the location. The man started waving his arms, trying to justify himself. He asked Zai to wait. The man noted that even he could not have predicted what happened. He reported that there were too many uncertainties in the mana flow, and he had a report from the American Association. The man was standing in a huge pile of scattered documents. A memory of sitting on a chair with his hands folded came back to him. He talked about asking a stranger to tell him that Kaiju would show up in a week, but the man didn't think that was the best option. He noted that the stranger did not give the hunters time to think. The man put his hand in his pocket and started searching for something. He asked if Kiritani thought he had deliberately named the wrong place. From the small portal, Zai took out his weapon. Kiritani stated that everyone knows about the authority of men in mana flow research. Zai noted that the man helped this country introduce filtration cubes and also invented mana suppressors. The man was in a desperate situation, thinking about the bracelet that he invented. The main character noted that recently the man also found something that neutralizes mana. Zai thought it was all too much of a coincidence. The man activated his invention on Kiritani. The main character's body was covered in a red aura. Zai assumed that this was the pressure that the man had set up with suppressors in his room. The man tried to escape from the room. Behind his back, Kiritani held the blade he was planning to use to strike. Zai noted that the man underestimated him. Kiritani's mana-soaked weapon flew towards the man. There was blood on the floor of the room. The main character hit a man in the leg with a blade, after which he collapsed to the floor. Kiritani was sitting in a chair, looking at the wounded man. Zai asked if the man was a doll, then who was pulling the strings. He wondered what kind of mask it was this time. A look of stupor crossed the man's face. He was holding onto his injured leg. The man stated that he was at a loss. He did not understand why he was ordered to do all this. The man suggested that they had anticipated Zai's actions. The main character took out his sword from it, as a result of which a bloody spray appeared. Kiritani stood up from his chair, pointing his weapon at the man. Zai ordered him to answer questions. Kiritani asked who had ordered the man to do what. Zai's blade was right at his throat. The man tried to answer Kiritani's questions, but something kept him from answering them. The main character put the sword to his chin. Zai suggested that, as in the case of Kaiju, he was bound by a contract. There were many folders of documents on the desk. The man asked if Kiritani had decided to kill him. He assumed that the hero's fame had turned her head. The man noted that even SS-ranked hunters don't have a license to kill. He said that if Zai crossed the line, he would become a regular hunter. On the edge of Kiritani's sword, a man's terrified face could be seen. The main character noted that the man was the first to cross it, so there is no point in whining. Zai said that he was convinced of his guilt and that was enough for him. The man's face was frozen in a frightened position. He asked Zai to wait. The man swore that he would tell everything. He told Kiritani to look for the twins. The man begged Zai not to kill him. Blood splattered everywhere. The main character turned towards the man who was on his last legs. Kiritani said that 30,000 people were killed because of the man. Zai believed that such a sin could not be left unpunished. Kiritani left the building where the man's body was located. There was a huge explosion behind him. The main character didn't care what they were planning behind the scenes. He was thinking that he should become stronger. Zai held his phone in his hands as he read the news about himself. Kiritani was lying on the bed. He was surprised that there wasn't a single article in the news about what had happened to Professor Oda. Zai was reading an article about his donation of 28 billion yen. The person who wrote it was amazed that Kiritani alone could do something that the state could not do. He also mentioned that Zai had donated half of the reward. The person suggested that Zai didn't care about the guild at all. He thought that the main character was just a saint. The person asked not to discuss the amount that Kiritani donated, as it is not easy to decide on it. He felt that the people who were discussing it did not provide any support, continuing to criticize Zai's actions. Kiritani held the phone over his face. Zai thought that from the outside, his actions really looked like he was a saint. The main character put the phone on his bed. Zai believed that if he could buy spirituality with money, he would be willing to spend any amount. Kiritani noted the problem, which was that there are not so many opportunities to do this. Zai decided that it would be better if there were only a few of them. Kiritani put his hand under his head, thinking. He thought that it was just like in the previous world. Zai was thinking that he wouldn't let the overlords do whatever they wanted. The main character fell asleep. Zai's hair fluttered in the wind. Someone was calling Kiritani by his old name. Zai found himself in the mountains, watching the river that was rushing through the expanses of the area. Kiritani assumed it was Eve calling him. The main character was shocked by what he saw. The woman asked him how he liked their names. She asked if it was very different from the Aslan continent. Kushu Francha of the 8 heroes appeared before him. She belonged to the long-eared race. Kushu reported that this world was created by their long-eared race in its image. She noted that it would be more correct to call it another dimension. The man put a hand on the shoulder of the startled Kiritani. Zai thought of her name. Around the main character were different hunters. The man said that here the 5 of them could not hold back, fighting the queen's army. Kiritani thought about having a dream about the past world. We were shown the bloody hand of a woman. The man noted that they had wounded Ms. Kushu. He thought that the people who did this were pathetic worms. Kiritani was amazed that the queen's son had blown himself up. In the protagonist's arms lay the bloodied body of a barely breathing Kushu. She tried to say his name. Tears flowed from Kushu's eyes. She asked Zai for forgiveness. Kushu felt that she shouldn't have jumped above her head. The body lying in Kiritani's arms gradually began to disappear. Kiritani agreed with her words. The main character thought that Kushu, who had lived in the forest for so many years, was not suitable for a battlefield at all. While in the blacksmith shop, the guy was forging something. The stranger asked Mr. Raidenville to stop, as it was a sacred relic dedicated to the goddess. Raidenville continued the manufacturing process. He ordered him to keep quiet, because neither their goddess nor her willow tree was gone. Raidenville asked what the relic was good for. He said that now they need a weapon that can kill the queen. The main character watched the process of creating this weapon. Raidenville asked the stranger to shut his mouth and bring him something to support the relic. Kiritani thought about how Raidenville had sacrificed his life and forged the Queen Slayer. Zai noticed that his hands still hadn't touched it. Raidenville was shocked by what he saw. A huge monster appeared in front of him, which destroyed his forge. The monster continued to smash everything in its path. Zai thought that the monsters understood the threat the sword posed to them, so they started attacking the dwarves' workshops relentlessly. Kiritani reflected that, after all, Raidenville's last creation had sunk into the sea. The dwarf watched as the monster dragged the weapon he had created into the depths of the sea. Raidenville's face was hurried. The main character was thinking that a dwarf who had lost the last hope he had put his life on fell into despair and suddenly disappeared. The fog enveloped Raidenville's body. Zai noted that they found it within the snowy mountains, which had long since become a battlefield. Kiritani added that the cause of Raidenville's death was suicide. The main character watched Raidemble's lifeless body. Behind Zai, there was a man who spread out his hands. The man stated that if they didn't kill the Overlord Queen, this battle would never end. He noted that he had to figure out where her base was located. The plot introduced us to the Krueger of the 8 heroes who belonged to the race of myths. Suddenly, Krueger's mask broke into 2 pieces. Krueger fell to the ground with a crash. The main character rushed to the barely breathing Krueger. Zai's ally reported what was outside, on the other side of the abyss. A memory of the space system popped up in Krueger's mind. He spoke of a sea of stars, in a boundless sea with no end in sight. Krueger reported that the queen was on a circular continent that was drifting there. As Zai watched, Krueger's body began to disappear. He asked Kiritani to kill her to end this war. The main character jumped out of bed, putting his hand to his head. Zai assumed that this dream was due to him fighting the Overlord. Kiritani thought that when he was Arden, he couldn't understand the meaning of Krueger's last words, but the moment he became Kiritani's show, he understood them. Kiritani thought about the place Krueger was talking about. He realized that it was space, and the monsters they called overlords were space kaiju. A silhouette of a monster appeared in his mind. Zai's face was angry. Now that I've realized everything, I need to start preparing. Kiritani kept thinking. The sun was shining on the hunter's shop. Sho headed to Izumi's workshop. Kiritani was standing in Suguru's doorway. Izumi asked him what was wrong. Behind Kiritani was the corpse of a kaiju. The main character stated that his share should be as large as the contribution to his murder. Closing his eyes, Suguru waved his hand. Izumi said that he couldn't afford to buy it. Suguru looked angry. Sho reminded Izumi of what he had said about just bringing him the ingredients he had obtained. You mean, grandfather, just take the materials and work, Suguru said, exasperated. Kiritani, I watched the items that were located in Suguru's store. Zai noted that he would give him half of it. Izumi's face was shocked. He turned his head towards the huge kaiju body. Kiritani asked to use it to create better equipment for him and his guild members. Izumi's gaze was fixed on Sho. Suguru asked if Kiritani really thought that he would only agree because of the valuable materials. Izumi remembered their Sho arrangement, but he was confused by the size of the job at his age. The main character stated that he relies on Sugura. The main character is lost in his own thoughts, heading for the exit. Zai understood that Maxby's appearance here meant that there was always the possibility of other overlords attacking. A kaiju silhouette appeared in his mind. Kiritani's gaze was very serious. Zai thought that in that world, they had lost before they even had time to make a plan, but this time, he thought it would be different. The sun was shining brightly over Kiritani's house. Irie called out to Sho. Holding a towel in his hands, Kiritani turned his attention to her. Igawa was standing in the doorway of Sho's room. Irie asked Kiritani to look at it. The main character didn't understand why she was making such a fuss. Igawa's eyes were troubled. Irie reported that something was coming out of her hands. Igawa's arm was wrapped in mana. Kiritani was shocked by this. Zai assumed that Irie had woken up, just like Finn had once. The main character was thinking about his conversation with Finn. Kiritani thought that he had expected something like this after their conversation. Irie's weakened body was completely covered in mana. Zai's face showed shock. He didn't understand what kind of insane mana was covering Igawa. Irie raised her hands in happiness. She couldn't believe she was awake. Igawa asked if she could become a hunter now. Kiritani's eyes were wary. Zai said that Irie could understand this better than him. Kiritani asked her to open the stats window. Igawa froze, waiting for her next move. Concentrating, Irie held her hand out in front of her. She chanted the spell to open the stats window aloud. Igawa continued to hold her hand out in front of her, but the stat window didn't open. Irie turned her gaze down, reddening. She supposed she was wrong. The sun shone down on Zai's room. The main character was surprised that she hadn't woken up. Kiritani suggested that Irie wasn't the same as Finn. Sho asked Igawa to sit down and concentrate on breathing. Kiritani made sure that Irie breathed as deeply as possible. Sitting down on the bed, Igawa closed her eyes. Irie said she would try to do it. Her body was completely wrapped in strong mana. The main character was shocked by what he saw. Kiritani couldn't believe his eyes. Zai was impressed by Irie's talent. He guessed what it was. There was a hint of Igawa's strong aura in his eyes. Irie's mana reminded him of the departed Kashu. Igawa was very concerned about what had happened. Irie asked Zai if her body was okay. The main character placed his hand on the head of the embarrassed Igawa. Zai noted that it was slightly different from the others. Kiritani asked Irie to let him know if she would replace any changes. Igawa understood Sho's request. A smile appeared on Kiritani's face. Zai was thinking that if he had met Irie in his previous life and taught her how to upgrade, then there would have been 9 heroes instead of 8. Suddenly, Kiritani's phone rang. The main character held his phone to his ear. Zai asked if something had happened. Kiritani made his way to the Japan Hunter Museum. Takabana was standing in front of Sho, looking worried. Kaoru was surprised that Sho would drag out a civil servant like that on her day off. The major didn't know what Kiritani was wearing. The main character was completely disguised and had glasses on his face. Zai noted that people have started to recognize him recently. Kiritani asked if this place had something to do with Inamoto Gaku. Kaoru, who was standing in front of the memorial, closed her eyes. Takabana said she didn't know if this was the person Sho was looking for. The major noted that they found a mention of him in the most unexpected place. The children's eyes were focused on the memorial. Kaoru asked Sho to look there. Many names were written on the memorial. The major reported that the names of all the hunters who stopped Japan's first SS-class split disaster were written here. Takabana noted that the fire of hell is engraved on this stone. Zai's head was covered by a hood. Kiritani thought that he was familiar with the name. Kaoru placed her hand on the memorial. The main character was thinking of Kishida Mamoru, who was Shin's grandfather, who taught him Radiella. Takabana was surrounded by a wall of names. Kaoru said that among them is the name of Inamoto Gaku. The major noted that he went missing 12 years ago and was eventually declared dead. The sun's rays were reflected on the memorial. Takabana added that he was a famous rookie who became an A-rank hunter at just 19 years old. Kiritani said that his special ability was mana bombardment. Zai noted that he was accumulating it like projectiles and then releasing it at high speed. Kaoru was shocked by what she heard. The major said it was absolutely true. The main character was wary. Kiritani confirmed the version that Kaiju was a butterfly himself. Takabana looked shocked. She noted that Zai says so, he saw it himself. Kaoru assumed that Sho had killed him. A memory of Kaiju attacking him popped up in his mind. Kiritani noted that Kaiju was the first to attack him. Zai was sure that Kaiju's goal was to kill him. The main character understood why he was so annoyed with him. Removing his glasses from his face, Zai walked forward. Takabana, who was in a hurry, said that this did not give Kiritani the right to kill him. Zai pointed out that a hunter who should be dead is attacking people, and a hunter control officer should understand what's what. Kiritani's hair was visible under his hood. Punish those who can't be punished by the law, isn't that what you and I have teamed up for? Kiritani asked confidently. Zai's cloak fluttered in the air. Kiritani asked them to stop serious conversations. Zai noted that since they are already here, you can see the exhibition. The children were watching one of the exhibits. Kiritani said that a powerful explosion occurred in the center of the fault, because of which the core was destroyed faster than expected. Zai didn't understand who could have caused this explosion. Next to him, Takabana put her hands behind her back. Kaoru noted that according to the incident records, the explosion occurred after Kishida Mamoru's ability went out of control. Sho understood why Mamoru was first mentioned. The stranger said that they are a ray that lights the way for others so that they do not get lost in the darkness. Startled, Kiritani turned his head, trying to figure out whose words they were. In her hands, Takabana was holding a piece of paper with some text on it. Takabana reported that Sho heard the motto that Kishida came up with. Kaoru asked if he had heard it before. A smile appeared on Kiritani's face. His gaze was directed at the huge hole that had occurred as a result of the rift. The protagonist was thinking about the battle cry of the 8 heroes and the secretory mana ability of the ancient dragon's Radial. In Zai's mind, the silhouette of a man who was completely clad in armor appeared. Kiritani suggested that the explosion was a side effect of the perpetual motion machine. Zai was thinking of the teacher. Kiritani, smiling, put his hand on his side. The main character assumed that the teacher came to this world before him. Actions take us to the Reload Guild. Screams could be heard from inside the building. There was an explosion on the training field. The impact sent Shin flying. Recovering, Kishida tried to stand up. Zai asked him to get up so that he could try again. Shin held his injured shoulder with one hand. Kishida didn't understand what kind of fly was biting Kiritani. Shin noted that Sho is usually not so tough in training. A memory of Radial's training popped up in Kishida's mind. Shin was surprised by the request to catch an innocent person and mock them. The man asked Kishida to come to him. Shin noted that he studied at Radial when he was very young and now he doesn't remember anything. Kiritani was heading in his direction. Zai noted that initially Radial was created in order to strengthen the body to the limit. The main character's hand is covered with a special technique. Zai pointed out that if Kishida really learned it, then his body remembers everything. Kiritani informed Shin that he was going to take it seriously now, so he needed to get ready. Kishida was lying against the wall where there was a huge hole. A startled Shin assumed that he had been making jokes before. Kishida asked about the scales on Kiritani's arm. Finn put his weapon to the back of Shin's head. Kishida didn't understand why Sho decided to have such a training session today. Chundra stood behind the startled Shin, his weapon in hand. Finn asked if he could join them. Shin was surprised to see him. Kiritani's body was covered in mana. The main character said that he would be only too happy for Chundra's participation. He asked Finn to treat Kishida. Surprised, Shin continued to lie on the floor, not understanding what was happening. Chundra asked me to believe in him. Finn stated that he would be able to heal him from a more battered state. Kishida asked if this was exactly what Hiller was supposed to say. Shin pointed out that no matter how he looked at the situation, Finn was just asking Zai to beat him up. Chundra asked him to be quiet. Kiritani put a hand to his head, lost in thought. He couldn't believe that Shin was his venerable master's heir. Zai informed them that they had a long way to go. Tamura, who was walking towards him, noticed that Sho was as strict as ever. Tamura greeted Kiritani with a wave. He said that he had a conversation with Zai. Tamura asked if Kiritani could spare him some time. Behind the main character, explosions were happening due to the fierce training. Kiritani suggested that they should talk somewhere else. Zai moved to his office and sat down on a chair. The MSS Symposium, Kiritani asked. Tamura placed the mug on the table and started talking about it. He said that this is an international symposium dedicated to the latest technologies related to mana. Tamura noted that it can be called one of the most important events in the world of science. Tamura stated his desire, which was for Sho to take part in it. Kiritani thought of the MCC Symposium. The man who was standing behind the microphone stand was pointing at the board that was behind him. The main character thought about it. Zai was thinking about what if he was dedicated to mana-related technologies. Kiritani asked if Professor Steve would be here by chance. Tamura's gaze was directed at Sho. He said it was true. Tamura noted that the professor is one of the founders of the symposium, so he participates every time. Tamura also said that in addition to Professor Steve, other luminaries of science are also involved. He noted that Professor Boris and Professor Chan will be there. In Kiritani's mind, a memory that was related to them popped up. Sho was thinking that all three of the people who Takabana said might be involved in the development of mana suppressors would be there. Kiritani agreed with Tamura. Tamura jumped up from his chair in joy. He thanked her. Tamura asked if he needed to arrange a separate meeting with the scientists, given Kiritani's interest in mana research. The main character refused his offer. Zai noted that the video with the murder of Kaiju was viral. He believed that because of this, the professors would try to open it. Still listening to Tamura, Kiritani reached for his mug to take a sip. Tamura noted that the curiosity of scientists is sometimes too zealous. Images of the bracelet that suppressed mana and the man appeared in his mind. Kiritani was thinking that the person who invented the mana suppressor and leaked misinformation about the Kaiju's appearance to Oda was definitely one of the three professors. Zai thought that somehow he needed to be caught by the hand. There was a large folder of documents on Kiritani's desk. Tamura was very happy that Sho had responded to his request. He mentioned that a top-class hunter would be arriving as Professor Steve's bodyguard, so they couldn't do without Zai's help. Kiritani was surprised by the arrival of a top-class hunter. A dark aura covered the room where Tamura and Sho were. Tamura said that he was a hunter, just like Kiritani of SSS rank. The action takes us to the sky, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. The plane was flying under the night sky. On board the plane sat a woman holding a tablet in her hands. She asked why the professor was making such a fuss. A look of displeasure crossed Steve's face. Rowan noted that she had volunteered to protect him. Steve didn't understand why she was so unhappy now. Karina, who was sitting in a chair, noticed him. Wade said she'd never been happier in her life. She asked him to stop talking nonsense and go to bed. The plot introduces us to Karina Wade, who was the second place in the world ranking of hunters. Karina was an American SSS class hunter. Wade was sitting in the next row. She asked Steve to look in the mirror. Karina said that Sour Mina understood everything. Be grateful that the one whose ass you touched when she was a rookie left you alive in the first place, Wade said. Steve's face looked very scared. He said that he did it unintentionally. Rowan added that he just slipped and grabbed Karina to keep from falling. Wade went to Rowan, leaning in his direction. She thought of him as an old perverted old man. Karina asked him who he thought the hunters were. Across from Steve, Wade concentrated her mana into her finger. Karina pointed out that if he continued to use that excuse, it would put a hole in Rowan's head that he was so proud of. Steve said he was sorry for what he had done. Rowan asked Wade to remove her finger. Karina stopped her technique by adjusting her hair. Wade's eyes were fixed on the clipboard. Steve thought it was because of this rudeness that Karina couldn't have a boyfriend. Wade watched the video of Kiritani killing Maxby. Across from her, Rowan turned his attention to the video. Steve said that now he understood why Karina had volunteered to protect him. Wade asked him to stop talking nonsense. Karina asked if Rowan knew about the joke that was hanging over Zai's head. Picking up her clipboard, Steve began to look closely. Rowan reported that if his eyes were correct, it was a ring-shaped luminescent object. Steve noticed that it looked like an angelic halo. Karina thought about it. Rowan handed the clipboard to Wade. Steve assumed it was some kind of ability. Rowan thought Karina knew better than he did. Wade held her clipboard up to her face. Karina said that she didn't even know what she was counting on. Wade noticed that for a second she remembered that Steve was a professor after all, and she thought that at least he would be able to find out. Rowan asked her indignantly if she had any respect for her elders at all. Steve said he'd had enough. He said he was going to bed, and Rowan asked Karina to wake him up when they arrived. Wade zoomed in on the image of Kiritani showing this technique. Karina was thinking about the angelic halo. Wade continued to study the image. The sun glinted off the hotel. The guys arrived at the MSS exhibition. Her guests were everywhere. Surprised professors surrounded the main character from all sides. The man said that he did not expect to see Zai here. He suggested that this time Japan took the Symposium seriously. The guy asked if Kiritani could tell him how many abilities Zai had used on Maxby. The stranger was trying to persuade Kiritani to visit their lab in Switzerland. Zai's gaze was quite concerned. The young man said that they would be happy to welcome him to China. Taken aback, Kiritani turned his head towards Tamura. Tamura was glad to see him. He fenced Zai off and told the professors that they could ask him all the questions another time. Tamura handed a can of soda to Kiritani. The boys were standing in front of a noisy crowd of professors. The main character noted that Tamura saved him. Zai noted that the interest in his person is even greater than he expected. Tamura said that he had called Kiritani here, so it was his duty to provide him with comfort. Zai turned his attention to the walking man. Kiritani took a sip of his soda. Zai guessed that the most important people were starting to arrive. His gaze was directed at Professors Boris and Chan, who were surrounded by security guards. Kiritani turned his attention to the stranger standing next to him. The main character thought about it. Zai was thinking that the stranger didn't look like a top manager running a company. Kiritani was thinking that he was interested in someone else. Zai's gaze was directed at Boris as he passed by. An unpleasant smell wafted around Kiritani, which he smelled. The main character thought that he could smell a faint smell of dead meat. Kiritani continued to watch Boris disappear into the distance. Zai could understand why there were bad rumors about the professor. Kiritani thought he was worth keeping an eye on. The young professors' faces were shocked. The main character turned his head in the direction of the newly arrived Professor Steve. Tamura noted that he had come. Rowan raised his hand in greeting. Tamura assumed that the professor was interested. He asked if Zai wanted to say hello to him. Kiritani's face was covered with hair. He didn't care what kind of girl was standing next to Steve. Karina was standing next to the startled professor. Tamura said that this is the SSS class hunter from America that he was talking about. Zai's gaze was directed at Professor Wade, who was walking beside him. Tamura noted that she had withstood the calamities of the split 41 times and also destroyed 2 kaiju. Tamura added that she is the second-ranked ranged attacker in the world. He revealed that Karina is called an eternal idol. Walking artillery battery, Karina Wade, Tamura continued. The main character was shocked by what he saw. Karina's body was completely covered in a strong flow of mana. Kiritani thought she was trying to hide it, but he could see it clearly. Zai felt that this was too much even for an SSS-ranked hunter. Kiritani was struck by her monstrous mana. The main character's eyes narrowed. He assumed that Karina was the same as Shin. Zai thought about how if that wasn't the case, then Wade followed behind Steve. Wade turned her attention to Zai. Kiritani knew he couldn't ignore her. The professor, who was standing behind the microphone stand, was talking about his project. The host said that Professor Chan will speak next. He asked to greet the professor with loud applause. Chang said that his report related to the practical application of mana to create a new generation of weapons. Tamura put a hand to his face. He informed her that Karinu had been looking at them for some time. Tamura asked if he and Kiritani had met somewhere. The main character thought about it. Wade continued to watch Zai as she sipped her glass of wine. Kiritani closed his eyes and leaned the soda can against his lips. Sho thought Tamura was just imagining things. Kiritani pointed out that even if she was actually looking at them, it was part of the bodyguard's job. The main character thought that after all, he is also an SSS rank hunter. Tamura guessed that his intuition was wrong. He stated that he would try to become a better person so that his little sister wouldn't have to blush because of him. Sho was surprised that Tamura had a sister. A silhouette of Aoki Sora appeared in Kiritani's mind. And you seem to be close, so I thought she must have told you, he continued. Tamura revealed that he is the older brother of the famous huntress Aoki. The main character was shocked by what he heard. Kiritani thought that they really were somewhat similar. Zai noted that he didn't know that Sora had a brother. The room where the symposium was held was decorated with various signs in every possible way. Tamura noted that Aoki doesn't like to open up, so he didn't see it as a surprise. He asked me to keep an eye on Aoki. Kiritani noted that they can't live without each other. Zai noted that this is like a symbiosis. Tamura was taken aback by Kiritani's words. He asked if Lee was talking about symbiosis. Kiritani's gaze was directed at Tamura, who was taken aback. Zai asked if everything was all right. Tamura stated that he must have misunderstood something. He said that in any case, he trusts the Council of Europe. The main character didn't understand what Tamura meant by trust. Suddenly, Kiritani stared at nothing. In front of him were 2 children who were walking by the hand. Zai didn't understand what they were doing here, and even in such costumes. The children looked at each other. Horror appeared in the protagonist's eyes. He remembered what Oda had said about looking for the twins. There was a mysterious aura surrounding the twins. Kirani noted that no one pays attention to them, despite the armor. Zai assumed it was an ability. The main character rushed in their direction. Tamura didn't understand what was going on. Karina noticed Zai running. The professors' faces were wary. Kirani stopped at the event's entrance. The twins were heading outside. Zai ran to the door at the same time. Kirani pushed open the door where the twins were heading. As he held onto the railing, he realized that there was no one here. The main character was amazed that they disappeared in the blink of an eye. Kirani turned his head towards Karina, who was standing next to him. She noticed that Zai's face looked like it had just been cheated. I had leaned against the front door. Karina put a finger to her cheek. I had reported that Kirani ran out of the hall as if he smelled a monster, so she followed him. Karina asked if there was anything interesting here. The main character headed back to the entrance of the hall. He thought he was just imagining it. Zai noted that he had too many problems that needed attention lately. Kirani froze at Karina's words. Wade asked if she should address these issues. With a smirk on her face, Karina pointed her finger up. She said that she didn't just come to protect the professor. The exit sign glowed bright green. Wade listened to Zai tell her that he was following suspicious people who later disappeared. Zai said that he would take care of them himself, so Karina has nothing to worry about. Wade was wearing green earrings. Karina said she was here for a similar purpose. Wade was talking about a dangerous organization that was being watched by the CIA, and she stirred. Karina asked if she had heard anything about Aziz al-Malik. Kirani's eyes were on Wade. Zai noted that if he was not mistaken, this was the leader of Mutalaka. We were shown places where planes dropped bombs on the military. Karina reported that a man who became king overnight by subjugating a country with an awakened ability. Flames shone brightly around the dead man. Wade noted that Aziz al-Malik is a hunter who has earned the nickname Necromancer Devourer because of his ability. Karina added that this ability allows him to control those he has killed so that his personal army grows after each battle. Wade reported that there were people who were attracted to even such a force, and the Mutlak terrorist organization appeared. Many members of the organization stood waiting for the command. The main character was surprised that they began to act at the very moment when he was looking for the leader of the masks. Zai's eyes were wary. Kirani didn't think it could be a coincidence. Tamura came up to him, taken aback. He asked if something had happened. Kirani said everything was fine. Everything around Zai was covered in an ominous aura. Kirani thought that if the days of terrorist activity and the dates of the Symposium were the same, then it definitely meant that one of the important people was guilty. Zai believed that the twins who appeared during the presentation were also a clue. Chang continued his speech from behind the microphone stand. The professor believed that they could speed up the development of mana-powered weapons. Zai was thinking that if Professor Chan was speaking at the time, he was definitely not the poet. Professor Steve and Karina were sitting at the table. Rowan asked where Wade had gone so quickly, her duties forgotten. Karina ordered him to shut his mouth. The main character has heard that Professor Steve has made many changes to the Symposium schedule. Zai noted that when the twins arrived, Steve was next to Karina. Kirani was completely lost in thought. The professor asked if Zai was okay. He noted that Kirani was in such a hurry to go somewhere because of the hall. Professor Boris was standing in front of him with a smirk on his face. He asked if Zai had found what he was looking for. The main character was shocked. Kirani thought about Professor Boris, who was surrounded by bad rumors. Zai couldn't believe that a man who reeked of dead meat was worrying about him. There was a huge explosion in the hall. The place was littered with a lot of rubble. The main character was standing in the middle of this rubble. Zai was shaking off the last of the dust from the explosion. Kirani supposed he'd been thinking too long. Zai thought about what they were now in. Behind Kirani was the surviving Tamura. He was hiding behind a table that had fallen as a result of the explosion. Tamura was glad that Kirani was okay. The main character put his finger to his mouth. He asked Tamura to be quiet. A look of shock crossed his face. Tamura was surprised that they were in a dungeon. With a serious look on his face, Kirani noted that it looked like it. A smile appeared on Zai's face. Kirani was thinking that this wasn't exactly a dungeon, but a poorly made willow. He wondered what the professor would do next. Suddenly, Zai became alert. He turned his attention to the fact that the dead were beginning to emerge from the shadows. A startled Tamura reported that he had heard something. A crowd of angry corpses was heading their way. The main character was ready for battle. He thought of the crowd that greeted them. Kirani said that they will consider the situation after dealing with them. The dead continued to run toward the boys. The bewildered professors didn't understand who it was. Tamura looked worried. He assumed they were dead people. Kiritani's hair covered one of his eyes. The main character was thinking about Karina's words. Zai understood that this was Azi's ability necromancy. Silhouettes of the people who founded Eve appeared in his mind. Kiritani suggested that Aziz is in league with the creators of Willow. Kiritani charged into the battle. Zai said they need to ensure security first. He said he would deal with the dead. Kiritani asked Tamura to protect the civilians. Tamura accepted his request. An enraged dead man was advancing on her. The dead man bit Kiritani. The main character used the ability Hand of Death. With the help of his ability, he took off the dead man's head. Zai's hand was covered in flames as the crowd of monsters continued to run towards him. Kiritani drew his sword. With just one attack, Zai destroyed the crowd of undead. The monster was completely enveloped in flames. Overjoyed, the professors stated that they were indeed looking at an SSS-ranked hunter. Tamura looked shocked. He thought that even for his rank, Kiritani was too strong. The main character continued to lead a fierce battle with the dead. Tamura thought that all SS rank hunters and even the best Aoki Sora in Japan were no match for him. Kiritani smashed through the remains of the dead man's body. The system notified the sea about the level increase. Kiritani was surprised that his level had increased because of a couple of undead creatures. Zai was thinking that he hadn't hunted much since the Maxby fight, so there shouldn't be many experience points left. Kiritani was lost in thought. The main character remembered that for killing heretics they give much more experience than usual. Zai thought that if Aziz was an undead steward, heretic, then all minions would automatically receive this status. Aziz was at the head of the army of the dead. Kiritani considered this an unexpected bonus. A smile appeared on his face. The professors were having a heated discussion about Zai's skills in combat. The man stated that the SS rank is something with something. The guy noted that now he is calm. Kiritani apologized to the professors and informed them that he needed to move faster. The main character put his hand on the shoulder of a shocked Tamura. Zai said that Captain Tamura from the association would lead them further. Kiritani said that he trusted him, so he hoped for their cooperation. Surprised, Tamura asked Sho to wait. Kiritani charged towards the monsters. He said that he would follow the path of killing the living dead. Sho asked Tamura to lead the others out where he had passed. The captain asked Kiritani to wait. But at that moment, with a blade that was covered in flames, Zai rushed into battle with the undead. The system alerted Kiritani to an increase in her mana pool to 271. Zai's hand was covered in a fire technique. Kiritani aimed flaming projectiles at the dead. The crowd of monsters was defeated. The system again notified the Ko about the level increase. Looking at the stats screen, Kiritani held the sword in his hands. The man begged the monsters not to approach him. The main character didn't understand where the screams were coming from. The man screamed for help. At that moment, the dead were trying to get into his hiding place. Kiritani's eyes narrowed. With just one punch, Zai destroyed the undead. In the depths of the cave, Kiritani saw Professor Chan trembling in fear. The professor, terrified beyond belief, rushed in his direction. He asked Zai to take him out of the dungeon. Chang noted that he would not be left in his debt. Kiritani's gaze was directed at the professor. He reported that they had not yet found a way out. Zai noted that he got rid of all the dead people on the way. Tamura appeared behind Kiritani. The main character asked the professor to join them. Chang was terrified. He refused his request. The professor stated that with Kiritani, who is an SSS rank hunter, it is 100 times safer. Chang continued to plead with Zai, saying that he would be careful and not interfere. Kiritani turned his head back to the professor. The main character noted that he understands his anxiety, but it will only be more dangerous. Sho asked Tamura to take care of him. The captain's gaze was confident. Tamura said he wouldn't let him down. The professor somehow agreed to his request. Kiritani once again went in search of the dead in order to ensure everyone's safety. Zai felt that he should unmask the culprit who had set this up. On his way to the dungeon, a voice was heard. Steve was on his knees, trying to clear his throat. He was surprised that they were in it. Rowan was shocked that the dungeon had opened up because of the explosion. A look of concern crossed Steve's face. Karina asked him to calm down. Her gaze was directed at the professor. Wade reminded Rowan that he had an SSS-ranked hunter with him. Rowan finally cleared his throat and tried to stand up. Steve said he didn't know how many kaiju she'd killed, but it was definitely safer with her. Karina noted that once Steve understood everything, he could calm down. In his hands, Rowan held an unknown object, which he in turn tried to study. Steve noticed that this dungeon was very different from the others. Surprised, Wade folded her arms across her chest. She was surprised that the professor noticed this. Irritated, Rowan assumed that Karina had forgotten who she was assigned to guard. Steve continued to examine the stone on his arm. The professor thought that just one look at this stone would be enough. Steve noted that these were holograms that were created artificially. He asked if Karina could see her fingers going through the stone. With a smirk on her face, Wade began to fix her hair. Karina believed that no matter how stupid it was still Eve, so she saw no reason to be surprised. Taken aback, Steve turned his gaze to Wade. Rowan asked if Karina knew where they were. Wade told me what she knew, and very well. Karina noted that in his place, she would have moved away. In the depths of the dungeon, the screams of the dead could be heard. The startled professor started waving his hands. He was amazed that they were coming. A crowd of monsters was heading their way. Karina assumed it was a pre-main course appetizer. Wade's body began to get covered in armor. Karina was fully prepared to fight the monsters. With a smirk on her face, Wade wished herself a good meal. The enraged monster lunged at her. With just one blow, Karina broke his skull. Satisfied, Wade continued to shoot the dead with her pistols. Their corpses flew in all directions. The muzzle of her gun was very hot. Wade finished her fight. Happy, Karina put the guns to her face. Startled, Steve peeked out of hiding. He was beginning to understand why so many people called her a jerk. The professor didn't understand why Wade only used firearms. Steve talked about how there are a lot of different weapons that run on mana at the moment. The mob of monsters attacked them again. Rowan noted that the gunfire had brought more monsters running toward them. Karina prepared for battle. It was equipped with the latest armor. The monster jumped back from the floor. He attacked Wade from above. Karina fired a shot at him. The monster's entire body was covered in bright flames. They continued to attack Karina from all directions. After Wade dealt with them, a new crowd of dead arrived. Karina assumed that they had decided to take her home. Wade dropped the guns to the floor. She was holding a submachine gun in her hands. Karina opened fire on the monsters running towards her. She watched the pile of corpses that had been left behind by the battle. A grin spread across Wade's face. She asked if that was all. A huge blue monster appeared in front of Karina and let out a roar. His eyes glowed red. Wade was glad to see something new. Karina dropped her automatic rifle on the floor. She drew her revolver. Wade was surprised that there were no bullets in there. Karina assumed she'd forgotten them. Wade continued to search for the bullets in her pocket. Just as Karina was trying to find ammo, a huge blue monster rushed towards her. He smashed everything in his path. The monster let out a powerful roar. While searching for ammo, Wade created a defensive barrier that blocked the monster's attacks. Karina couldn't figure out where she'd put them. Steve was shocked by what he saw. Surprised, Rowan spoke of powerful attacks and impenetrable defense all rolled into one. They don't just call it a walking artillery battery, the professor continued. The monster tried to break through Karina's defense. Overjoyed, Wade said she'd finally found them. In her hands, Karina held bullets that were wrapped in powerful mana. Wade started to load the revolver. She noted that it was her turn to attack. Karina opened fire on the huge monster. There was a huge explosion in the dungeon. The blue monster's head was incinerated by Wade's shot. Karina noted that it was more pleasant to kill healthy thugs. Her face was protected by a special armor. Karina didn't think it was time to be happy yet. She turned to the man. Wade had ordered him to let the professor go because he was useless anyway. The woman's hand was at the throat of a terrified Steve. He noted that Karina herself was to blame for playing too much and leaving him unattended. The man said that if Aya didn't want the old man to die, then she should slowly lower the gun. At the same time, Karina's bullet pierced the man's head. Wade blew smoke from the gun's muzzle. She was amazed that there are simpletons who are ready to go to the tank with a gun. Do you think that once you went after Aziz, you suddenly became stronger? Added Karina. Startled, Steve put a hand to his heart. He was shocked by what Wade had done. Rowan noted that it might have missed. Karina said that the professor should thank her for saving him. She stepped on the man's lifeless body. Wade asked the professor to look at the man, whose tattoo showed that he was a member of Mutlak. Karina noted that there are even more of them under the clothes, and all this is the praises of Aziz. Steve went over to the body to examine the tattoo in more detail. Wade assumed they wanted to eliminate all the Symposium scientists. Rowan reported that when he saw the living dead, he immediately thought it might be them, but now he definitely has no doubts. Steve turned his head in Karina's direction. The professor asked if she could save the others. Taken aback, Wade asked if he was sure. Karina noted that her mission is to protect him. The professor's gaze was very determined. He said that he would be fine because Karina had done a great job here. Rowan pointed out that he couldn't let the research brothers die at the hands of a gang of criminals. Steve asked me not to worry about him and save the others. A smile appeared on Karina's face. Pleased, Wade noted that she'd expected him to say that. Karina said she'd be right back. She asked the professor to hide somewhere. The main character continued to walk forward. Holding his blade in his hands, he stared into the distance of the depths of the willow tree. Kiritani's eyes narrowed. The man said his name. He stated that he was expecting him to arrive. A grin appeared on Zai's face. Kiritani assumed that he himself had just arrived. Zai noted that he understood the fact that he didn't have time to change his clothes, but at least he could change his voice. Kiritani's face caught the sun's rays. Zai asked to stop this farce and remove the ridiculous mask. Kiritani named Professor Boris,